Okay. I'd like to call to the order the Hood River White Salmon Bridge Authority Commission meeting of May the 12th, 2025. Let it be shown that from the Oregon side, Mike Fox, Arthur Babbitts, Grant Polson, Catherine Thomas is calling in. Jake Edwards is calling in. On the Washington side, Jake Anderson has called in. Eric Wilson is in attendance. And I think that's it.
Yeah, that's it. Let's see.
Okay, but we do have a quorum, so we can go ahead and proceed. Is there any modifications, additions to the agenda for today?
I just have a couple of questions concerning the email that we got from a resident. So I have time to talk about
we'll
that.
talk about that in just a second here. Okay, could I have a motion to approve the?
I move that we approve the agenda as submitted.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it passes. Correction of approval or correction of meeting notes from the last board meeting, April the 28th. Is there any adjustments that we need to make? If not, could I have a motion on that one?
Move the meeting minutes be adopted as presented.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, it passed. Public comment. Mike, do you want to bring that up?
Do you have anything to bring up?
Did I don't see her on.
No, I think she came with her. She said she has another meeting now, but she'll watch the tape.
Okay.
We just want to read it.
Yeah. Why don't we just pull it up, because I think there's a couple of issues there.
All right, give us just a second to get it pulled up. Do you have it?
I have it printed out, so. Yeah. You bring it up. Yeah. That would be helpful too. I'll get it pulled up.
Pull it up. You want to tell everybody what it was, or?
Yeah, I'll and then help me out. So what's Tracy's last name?
Thomas Full.
Thank you. I won't try and say that myself.
I think I got it right. She'll tell me.
She sent in an email. Public comment on May the 12th meeting. This is and it deals with the 6F appraisals, primarily on the Oregon side versus the Washington side. And correct me if I'm wrong here, Mike, but I think the issue that she brings up is that if we use property, which we can, on the Washington side for 6F, the Oregon people don't get the benefit of that recreational area on the Oregon side. You would get it on the Washington side, but not on the Oregon side.
Yeah, I think generally that was her concern, was mitigating the property on the Washington side instead of on the Oregon side.
Just to start with, so
do we need to read this into the record?
About,
I'm sorry, do we need to read this into the record?
No, it's part of the record. You can put it in the record. But the but as we discuss it, it would be nice if we discuss in a way that people can understand what we're talking about. So the property that is my understanding, this has to do with the relocation of the port onto other port property, and so that's.
I was going to give an update on it. You want me to kind of give the background on what's going on? And I was going to do that after.
Well, she asked some good questions, and she asked about what the 6F mitigation process looks like. And one of the specific concerns she had, which I emailed her about, was she was talking about it was described that the mitigation could be towards a future park on the Washington side. She knows nothing of the discussions, the fact that this is actually an actively discussed project in White Salmon. So it sounds on the surface like you're talking about a mitigation to a park which doesn't even exist.
Correct.
But for the last, since.
But she may
Dave
not
Boucher
know
was, well, I
there has
told
been
her.
discussions.
I told her that since Dave Boucher was mayor, this has been under discussion, and that one of the possibilities is that if this funding could be part of the package to make the park come into existence.
Right.
So the mitigation would be for an actual park versus a imaginary park, but then there's still the question that she asks about who benefits from it.
Correct. So, yeah, and we're working through the 6F. So the 6F was a protection that was put, a recreational protection that was put on the port facilities back when they took the land grants back in the 70s.
So that's what I'm confused about. So 1963 is when the Army Corps of Engineers built the first fill, and the port.
This is due to I'm going to use an acronym because I can't ever remember
But I don't live close to them.
LCWF.
Land and Water Conservation
Conservation
Fund,
funds, that's it.
federal funding.
So it was federal funding. In order to obtain that federal funding, you had to allocate property that you owned as 6F property.
Okay.
And recreational property. So the port did that, not, back in the 70s when they did it.
And this was the whole, this is the launching ramp.
They built a boat ramp, they
What's
built.
that?
The sack that
We
Nancy
moved
gave.
that, please.
Yes.
So they built the boat ramp and they extended some utilities with the funding. It was, I think, less than $15,000
Brown paper.
that they had taken in, but it then encumbered that whole area.
Handle.
Which includes where the port offices.
Your lunch?
Correct. So it was all of where the port's office sits, all around
Do we have the lunch?
all around the inlet there. The part where the Marina Greens is at, the DMV buildings,
Right.
all the way down that other side and then out the hook. Not
Dang, I
right,
gave
but
her.
outside that,
Inside there.
the launch area. Why is that?
Hey, whoever's talking on virtual, could you mute, please?
I thought you could just right click and hit mute.
We're working.
Oh, there it goes. Okay. It's muted now.
Thank you.
Okay. So all of that was included. It was a very rough sketch. So we
Right.
went back and worked with NPRD or OPRD and NPS, Oregon Forest Division and National Park Service.
Yep.
To identify the boundaries. We also mitigated with them what was in the boundary and what was not in the boundary. So we have gotten concurrence that the DMV building, the parking in front of the Department of Motor Vehicles building and that gray building that's out there.
Yep.
Marina One.
Or in Marina One were not
They were not.
included, and those were exempted out.
And then the ports building.
Facilities,
Yep.
the port building, all of that area is within it.
Okay.
However, it's a non-conforming use that was never mitigated for.
Okay. And do you know how it was allowed to be built?
No,
Okay.
no, we just know that it was there. We tried to get it ruled as exempt, and OPRD and MPS came back and said no, that it was a non-conforming use.
Okay.
So that would have to be mitigated for,
Because the bridge is going to go across it.
so the bridge is gonna come across it
Right.
and basically remove that non-conforming use
Right.
of the property. It's a value for value, not a area for area conversion.
Okay.
So we are having the appraisers give us a kind of, I'll call it initial fair market value of that property, just so we know roughly what amount that property will be valued at.
And they don't value it as recreation property.
No, they value it as, it's probably not the exactly right term, but basically vacant land that could be used for anything. So best use, kind of best use, right terms for that, the best use of that property.
Fallacy to that.
Well, it's kind of obvious, but on both sides though,
Yeah,
right? So.
So they value
land that's going out are both in the same
same.
condition.
Same baseline.
So they'll value it, then we will know how much we have to mitigate for. And then we can start looking at the properties and we will have to get those valuated. And values put on them to determine an equal amount.
Right.
We don't know what that value is right now, so once we know that, then we can start looking at other properties. So one property that was brought up was the property on the Washington side. That is a potential property. We will have to work with OPRD and MPS if we want to, if the authority chooses that that's the property they would like to mitigate, they will have to get.
So it's our decision or it's our application.
You can recommend that that's the property you would like to. You have to get concurrence that it meets the
Got
requirements.
it.
And then put the 6F restrictions on it for recreational use.
So a question for you, the property on the Washington side, that's for the most part Clickitat County?
Yes.
Okay, and if Clickitat County would donate that, it would certainly help us out trying to find funding.
Well,
Yeah, so wait a minute though, you guys are going to the answer.
yeah,
And what we're trying to do is address the process.
Right.
Yeah.
And address Tracy's kind of concern.
yes. So
You
Tracy,
can't start with an answer there. We
Right.
gotta kind of work.
so that's one property that'll be identified. It's not the only one. So once the properties are determined that are equal value, then the authority will have to make a decision as to which ones they would like to move forward with. And then they will have to get concurrence that those are properties that they deem to be mitigated.
Well, if you're gonna mitigate port property, you have to get port approval, don't you?
The port would have to agree to use that property as mitigation property and put a 6F encumbrance on it. But the authority will work with OPRD and make the decision on what properties are used for mitigation. The impacted facility doesn't get to make that decision. They're just an impacted facility. So the authority will have to say, hey, we would like to mitigate here, here, and here. Right? And then OPRD and NPS would have to concur that yes, that is. The owners of whatever those properties are would have to agree that yes, they'll put the 6F, they'll use it as recreation.
What's your
And so the
schedule for
reason-
getting the,
I think they gave them notice to proceed on the fair market value last week. So we'll get that fair market value in and then we'll start moving through that process. It'll take a few months to get through the whole
Oh.
thing.
So this is,
assessment? It shouldn't take 2 months to do an assessment.
Keels on, who's that?
this is Doug. I have a question more on the assessment. So how is the property currently zoned and wouldn't that have an impact on the value?
There's no comparing.
I believe that they will, Doug, have to take that into account. They will have, they do, and I'm not familiar with this, I just know the term. They will have to determine using what they call yellow book process to determine the valuation of the property. So once they do that, once they get the appraisal and the fair market value, we can bring that back to the authority to take action on it. And then we can answer all those questions about how that value was determined. But there is a very defined process by OPRD and MPS on how you value these properties. And then our appraisers will have to follow those processes. So we can come back and brief you all on how the property was and the value was determined. But I'm assuming they will take into account zoning of the property.
So if I could kind of summarize, we've got 4 entities that have to all agree
At least.
on property that is unmitigated and what we're going to mitigate it with and balance all of that out. So
Correct.
basically 4 to 6 agencies to do that. The other thing that I think Tracy is kind of putting in her email is a concern that the port, when they made their deal, they didn't kind of follow through with the rules. And so we have to mitigate the rules because we're going to use it, but there's also a potential mitigation that has to be done by the port in addition to.
No, that's not true.
Trying to point
The
out.
port does not have to mitigate unless the bridge project does not do it for them.
I think that is Tracy's concern, though, that the port made a mistake years and years ago, and the bridge authority may decide to mitigate that on Washington. And her feeling is that then the Oregon side is left out because of the port's previous mistake.
So for a little clarity, this started because of Kevin Green with the port director making a comment. And so just to understand his role in this, I think Kevin is trying to be helpful in trying to understand what the possible full range of mitigations might be. And because he knows all the properties around, he's looking at other things that might be usable. And specifically, he wanted to know if it was a possibility to use this Washington land. Not that it's his decision, not that it's his plan, but hey, is this within the realm of possibility?
So we had brought this up early on when we started and presented it to the port as a potential. Originally, OPRD and National Park Service, they are not totally on board with that because you're mitigating outside of the governing agency. It is not a requirement. We have to submit a request to them and they have to approve for us to go outside of that area to do the mitigation. So that's why I said there's more steps to this. Also, one of the things that she said in here about parking lots, if that parking lot supports a recreational area, then it is considered part of it. So just because it's a parking lot, you can't make it grass and then call it a recreational. If it's already serving a recreational purpose as a parking lot, that still counts.
So if now it was paved and striped and it's supporting recreational use,
that could be a mitigation element. And if there's portions of, and I think Kevin has identified some portions of the port properties that have not ever been used as recreation that might be able to be converted to that. If the port's willing to do that, then yes, those could be considered as well. But the first step is to figure out the value that we're mitigating for, and then figure out how much property and where we would like to mitigate. Wetlands is another thing. Wetlands can be used as a mitigating element if they want to do that, if that's what everybody would choose.
And Kevin was asking me about several wetlands around the river area.
And that could be something that was done as well. So there's options as to what we mitigate, but it is my opinion is the authority is the one who has to
now, is this
work with MPRD.
Is this done on financial amount, or is it also done by square foot?
Just dollar, purely dollar. Purely based on the appraisal values.
And we do not know what that dollar amount is yet.
Correct.
And so when we know that dollar amount, then we will start the process of
Identifying property, appraising properties.
Considering what
various properties that are available.
What works, coming up with possible options for the authority to propose for concurrence.
Because you will have to go get those properties appraised. So you'll want to think about how many, you don't want to do 50 of them. You need to go think about what's a reasonable number that you would want to go get appraised to get to that. But you have to do whatever that amount is.
Right.
So if it's $1 million, then you do $1 million.
That's the
5 million, then it's 5 million.
Yeah, and so I'd be thrilled when we're at that point.
Yes.
The fact that we're moving forward with the bridge and that the construction's on a path that we're working through the right of way issues, the mitigation issues, that will mean that we're in a wonderful place. We have to get there.
Yep.
Let's jump ahead here a little bit. Dan Bates has to leave us here in a few minutes. So Dan, can you take over and give us an update?
Sure. A variety of things are going on. I think the best way to describe this is the three different methods we have of securing funding. The first is to be included in a transportation package. The second would be to have our Bill 2184, which includes our funding, pass out of Ways and Means. And the third would be some funding through the lottery capital construction bill, which is how we've been funded in the past. So the transportation package is still being negotiated. We are waiting for a bill draft to emerge. We should see that in the next week and a half or 2 weeks. The way that our funding could be included in that bill, or it can be included in a later version of that bill, or our funding that may not be in that bill, but our underlying bill passes as part of that package. And so you could see both bills moving, and the one that is 2184 would produce our funding. If a package fails, then it is, likely that the best option we have for funding is in the end of session Christmas tree bill, as we've talked in the past. And you all had the opportunity to testify in that on Friday and support of the lottery funds for that. And again, that is sort of the third best option from our perspective. It is likely going to be not the full amount, and we will have to secure language around a commitment, even if the amount isn't fully funded in the capital construction. I would say negotiations on the transportation bill are ongoing. The politics remain dicey, but people continue to work together on it. And it's too early to tell whether it will pass. I feel, as I have along, that we are in a good place with regard to being included in some form, whether our bill passing as part of the package or being built into the package, if there is a package. There's obviously, until the politics are done and the negotiations occur, it's tough to give any more certainty than that. But right now, that's the state of play. I know I have to jump into a meeting in a couple minutes, but I can answer a couple questions if folks have them.
And again, Dan, this is on the Oregon side for.
That's correct.
When the meeting.
Yes. The other piece I will say is we were able to express the great news from Washington in a letter to all of the stakeholders, both the Ways and Means stakeholders as well as the transportation stakeholders, and received a positive response, and people nodded their head, understood that this is they're in their court now, and that others, at least Washington's done its job, and this helps constructive pressure.
Thank you, Dan. Let's go back to the co-chair's report. Jake, do you have anything to bring up?
I was just going to say, we've got a lot of positive movement. It's feeling like we're moving in the right direction when it comes to environmental, when it comes to funding. I think we're hitting a really good stretch here, and let's hope for continued good news.
I agree. I would share the same thing. I think we're working pretty well with Keywood to get the numbers close together for 1B. We're still waiting on some language on the contract that we would like to encourage, Keywood to get that over to us so we can start looking at it and talking about it. But that's moving along fine too. I agree. There's some positive signs for our project. Hey, how about project director's report?
All right, on the funding, the BIP, there's really been no change on that from last discussion. On the infra, we've heard rumors that there may be another release of infrastructure projects this week, and maybe even over the next couple weeks, repeated releases. So
this is 200 million that we were theoretically awarded.
We were awarded in January. We were up to the point of final signatures. We have not signed the agreement. So for us, it would be the step of signing the agreement. We've heard if that does come out, it'll be a very quick turnaround to get it any final comments and get it turned back.
Do we have any further information? Last I heard that it was going to be on the secretary's desk on Wednesday.
That's, yeah. The latest rumor.
Heard anything?
We've got Jim Kolb on, who might have an update.
Jim, do you have an update on that?
Nothing more specific. No, I mean, I know DOT continues to say they have 3,200 project agreements they've been trying to go through, and, they're slowly rolling them out. But no more specific on ours and timing specifically on the infra pieces.
Okay, thank you.
The raise grants, we were able to Did we get a check yet?
We didn't get the check yet,
But
but
it's
it's
approved.
still approved stage. But since it's approved, we're expecting the payment coming pretty
It
soon.
was approved at the beginning of last week.
Yeah.
So we've been about a week, so we would expect the payment to come this week. And since we've gotten to that stage, we restarted that work. So they're back to restarting that raise grant work.
I think it would be helpful, T, you're probably doing it anyway, keeping track of turnaround times on our invoices.
Okay. Yeah.
Tribal, just two big ones. The Umatilla tribe, we had a second meeting with them. With FHWA to go over some comments that FHWA sent. They actually have additional comments that they need to provide to Umatilla. Umatilla will review those comments and then they will provide some requested clarification as to their points in the MOA.
I thought we got a commitment from David Clark.
Supposed to be this week.
Do that this week.
Yes, supposed to be this week. But we'll see, we'll track that and make sure those comments get sent over, but there is a concern that there is going to be a delay. I think depending on the level of the comments, then it may have to go back through all the different levels of review within Umatilla. So we're waiting to see the actual detail of the comments and then Umatilla will make that decision, but they were
really trying to get Umatilla done first and play off the rest of it.
And then NESPERS, we had a staff meeting with FHWA and NESPERS on the 7th. That started some conversations related to FHWA responding back to NESPERS's proposed terms of the agreement. FHWA has rejected those terms and is going to provide some information back to them on what might be more appropriate. There's going to be at least one, maybe two more staff meetings, and then a tribal council meeting is tentatively scheduled for May 27th in Latwai. So that will be an in-person meeting with tribal council.
We see how the next want to go do that unless the groundwork has been set.
Correct. So we'll see how the next two meetings go, and then we'll decide if that other meeting happens. And then Yakima and Warm Springs, they're still just coordinating meetings right now. We've not had a lot of luck in getting additional meetings with them. Negotiations, I think Commissioner Fox already talked about that. We have a final meeting with Kiewit tomorrow on the fee. We're still waiting, as he said, on contract language. Once we get agreement on the fee, then it'll come to the committees, then through legal review, and then through to the board for approval. So that'll be probably over the next couple months. We're also waiting though on funding in order to actually execute a notice to proceed for that 1B phase. 6F we talked about. I'm going to go back to any of that. And then just another side note, and if FHWA is on, they can expand on this, but they have lost additional staff at the division level. They had a couple more that took that early retirement. Their last days were beginning of May. One here locally, and the lady that had helped us with the risk workshop. It was one of their national folks has also left. So I think they're down to 50% or less of their staff than what they had. So we haven't seen a huge impact yet, but I would anticipate that will start to impact their ability to respond. But we'll keep working with them on that. That's all I have. The one last thing is Christy is on, and she will provide you with an update on the record of decision and also the biological opinion.
Hey, everybody. I'm going to try to share my screen here and see if this works. So I can show you a list that Mike Fox asked for. Let's see. How does that look?
It doesn't look
Right
very
there.
good. Oh, there it
It's
goes.
coming in a second.
There you
There
go.
it is. Beautiful. So last week when we were chatting, Mike asked for a kind of a progress checklist that we could all spend some time looking at on environmental. This doesn't include the biological opinion work. This is just towards the FAIS ROD. And I just put 10 items on here. You can see the first three, I gave 3 green checks to because we've accomplished these, December and then April. Of course, we mentioned earlier that the NEPA reeval has been completed and the 4F traditional cultural properties has been approved, which was these are both real big steps forward for us. So where are we now? Just to point out, we are actually headed for 10, which is the combined FEIS ROD approval. That's what this checklist is for. Right now, we're actually at 4, and we're working very diligently to get the Section 106 Memorandum of Agreement shaped up, and there's very little left to be done on this. We have a meeting with the lawyers that's in the queue to be scheduled to settle on the very last words for this document. After that, it'll go out for signatures for all of the consulting parties. So we should have that, I'm hoping by the end of the month. Should be pretty good. Then I'll point out that numbers 5 through 8 are what we call cooperating agency reviews. And this is when we take the FEIS ROD and send it off to these agencies, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, WSDOT, the U.S. Army Corps, and the Coast Guard. They have all seen this document previously, but it's been a while. So what FHWA did just recently was send the points of contact for each one of these agencies a little update, letting them know what we have changed, altered, refined, addressed in the FEIS since the last time they saw it in 2022. We're hopeful with that heads up and a little bit of planning that once the cooperating agency leads receive the FEIS ROD, they'll be able to turn around their reviews in a couple of weeks. What we're looking for is just a check the box from them that they are on board. Once all of those are done, there's one more review that we have a little bit harder time getting our heads around, and that's a new review at the federal level at the U.S. Department of Transportation of the combined FEIS ROD. And this is a review that was established by the current administration. And so far, we don't really have a timeline for how long this will take. We're all hopeful that it will be very quick, but there's no evidence that it would be, and there's no evidence that it will take to what extent it will take. But following that, we will have accomplished pretty much everything we need. Meanwhile, all of the appendices, and there's a few for this document, will have been completed, and this will be queued up for FHWA signature. So this is our 10-step approach. Mike Fox, I can't see your face because of the way the cameras are set up, but I'm hoping you're nodding your head and saying that this is what you're looking for. I'm open to any feedback.
Yeah, this was it. I just wanted to see the date of June 30th for the ROD sign.
Yes, I know. I wish I could promise that, but I think we're going to have to hold off until we know more about number 9 on this list. We're in a good trajectory towards that.
So a question for you. Our legal folks from our organization, shouldn't we be getting them to read this document?
They already did. That's the last legal comments that we need. There's one section that they have a comment on that they need to resolve with FHWA's legal.
Okay. So 5, 6, 7, and 8. That's these other folks we've already looked at.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Yeah. Thank you, Christy.
You're very
Christy,
welcome.
you want to give a biological opinion update real quick too?
Yeah, this is very high level. We have met with the liaison with FHWA in the last couple of weeks, and the outcome of that is that we will be providing a new document to them probably the end of the month. The whole purpose of this coordination is to align the outcome of the biological opinion with the construction project. There's a lot of ins and outs. Anybody wants to call me or chat, send a chat, I'll be glad to fill them in.
So one of the things that I've been thinking about on this this could be a place where we find some efficiencies going forward. And what we're trying to get out of the biological opinion should have a direct impact on construction. And as we go forward, I'd like to make sure that KMC and Kiewit is doing an estimate of this. And are we talking big money? Are we talking little money?
Yep, so we have it on the risk register as a risk tracking item. So once we know more about what they approve, then we can update that risk item. And then when we get to the 60%, we'll do a formal update of the estimate. But as we go along, we can do incremental.
Yeah, I think we should be doing an incremental in that if one of these items ends up to be big money, that would tend to push us into pushing harder on that particular one because it's going to give the biggest benefit.
Yeah.
That's why I think as you go, you gotta be estimating.
Yeah, and that bigger bucket of biological opinion, potential risks will fall into then sub risks or opportunities based on what, like right now it's a big, huge bucket with 5 or 6 different items.
Yeah.
Some of them might turn into opportunities, some of them might turn into just on an individual basis. And then we can track them, I think, through there as individual items. Right now, they're all kind of rolled up into one big bucket.
Bucket.
Yep. And then there was one funding, sorry, that I forgot to mention. That is the Oregon Lottery Bond Agreement. It is in review. The DOJ with Oregon has reviewed it. We have to get it to our legal team to review. And then it'll come out to once we get through that process. So.
What kind of a timing or do we need from our lawyers? A week, 2 weeks?
I think it's going to be a really quick review. However, I think Rob's on the call, but we previously submitted our review comments, but it did not get through their cycle. So I think there will be a little bit more time but we don't need that money until August, July.
September.
Yeah.
I'd be, let's get the money early.
Yes.
Well, I mean,
kind of a nice change.
I'd like to have it finalized by the end of May so that they can do their piece so that we have full access to it by July 1st.
Yep. Okay. Legal report.
So did you have any?
Rob.
I just wasn't sure if your previous comments, or you might update them again after your legal team looks at them.
Yep.
Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I don't think all of our original comments were incorporated, so we were going to go ahead and just have legal look at it too and provide one set of comments.
Yeah, because they never saw your comments, because normally we get a draft and then you can comment on the draft, but then they just send it to you for signatures. I'm like, oh, okay, well they skipped a step.
Okay.
But I know one of your previous comments was you wanted it to take out the construction possibility. I just want to give you just a general, the fewer things you want changed, the better, since it's already gone to DOJ. Because if you guys want to do some changes, and you can, I mean, that's fine. But if they're kind of optional-ish, it'll have to go back to DOJ, and that could take.
Yeah, so we want to try not to let that happen.
Based on some follow-up conversations we had with them, we probably won't need to make as many comments. We never know exactly how they're going to be managed, the different grants from the different agencies. This one's a little more leadway. So it's critical to get some of that out of there. So I think as long as that's consistent with everybody, then we're okay.
Okay. Legal report. I didn't see anybody from legal on the call.
Judy's
Yeah, Commissioner, I'm here. It's Judy.
Oh, yeah, Judy.
Good
Okay.
afternoon. Good afternoon. I really don't have anything to report. Christy gave you a status update on the Section 106 MOA, which we've been working with her office on and hoping to finalize that. Other than that, I don't have anything new to report.
Okay, coming up on you though, once we get the language from Kiewit, we're going to be looking to provide that over to you folks to take a hard look at, and we do some discussing.
We had a communicated with Fox and Garvey, Mr. John Program, who helped us at the initial contract negotiation. So he is standing by anytime Kiwi submit their proposed change.
Okay.
And so also on legal, there'll be the audit contract, right? That hasn't come through yet, has it?
Audit contract negotiation starts this Wednesday.
Okay, and so there'll be a contract for legal to review soon.
Yep.
Okay. Government relations.
Thanks, Commissioner. We've already heard from Dan Bates about the Oregon legislature. On the Washington side, of course, last meeting, we heard Brad Boswell's announcement about the good news that we got the additional 50 million allocated through the Washington state legislature. Next step on that, we're waiting for Governor Ferguson to sign the budget bill. He's got 20 days to do that. So that brings us to this Saturday. Last week's edition of the Gorge News, we got a nice write-up from Noah Notaboom announcing that. I'm sure folks saw that. I think we got a mention on OPB as well in a write-up about the Washington legislature, though I haven't seen it. Once the governor signs the bill, we'll get out a formal press release and some information up on the project website. On the local front, some folks here have been doing informational meetings with city governments, county governments, community groups, and we're looking to more formalize that as we get into the summer. So we're kind of building the scaffolding around that approach and reworking a new project presentation. I think we've gotten some invites from groups and just said yes. It seems like a good way to meet the public where they're at, get good information out through channels where people feel comfortable. So if any of you are interested in participating in those, giving the presentations, or have ideas, if you're part of Rotary or the Elks or some other group that may be a good place for the project to go and present, please let me know and I'll get them on the schedule. Jim Kolb, I see you're still there. Anything new on the federal front?
No, I mean, not really. Just as Mike mentioned, we've waited on this, the release of the infra grant as well as the CDS funding, and those two things are linked. That rumor is out there that they may be releasing more. They released 180 projects last week, kind of a range of projects, including 6 infra projects. So, we remain hopeful. I will say the infra projects they released were significantly smaller than ours. And of the 6 infra projects that were included in the batch that they put out, 5 of those went to state DOTs. So I don't know if there's a pattern there. I guess we have to wait and see what's happening there. We've been in fairly regular communication with the delegation offices, letting them know that we weren't in this round. And we're hopeful that, they're going to start to roll some of these out more regularly. So we haven't really launched them since we did after our trips in March, but, we're prepared to do that if they're not, if we're not in this next round that comes out this week. The other thing we're tracking, and we've reached out to Senator Merkley's office, Sean McMaster's having his nomination to be administrator of the FHWA on Wednesday. We're going to engage Senator Merkley. As I said, we reached out to his office, see if he can ask a question on the status of the infra project agreement as well as BIP. If he's smart, he won't really answer that question, but it'll send a signal across. I'm sure he is smart. I shouldn't have made it sound that way. Most of these nominees don't really answer questions, but it definitely sends a shot across the bow that Senator Merkley's tracking this. So we haven't been able to confirm whether or not he's going to be at the hearing. There's a lot going on this week, but hopefully he will be, and we can take that opportunity. So those are the big things happening here, and we'll see what happens later this week. Hopefully these infra grants start to flow out.
So when you take a look at news coming up, to me, once Washington signs the bill, that's a newsworthy. Once we know what's going on with Oregon, that's another one. If we can get an agreement signed on our $200 million, that's another one. And then I think another one that we're assuming, but I think once we award 1B to Kiewit. That's another big milestone for us.
Yeah, so I met with Dan this morning. We talked through, we got a committee meeting for communications on Wednesday. What we talked about was starting to think ahead of how we would message those events as they come on and start getting ahead of those, so that we're drafting up language that's ready to go. And then whenever things happen, we can, and some of them we might have to draft up both versions, but getting things ready so that we can start talking about.
I thought that the handling of the Washington legislature was great. I thought that the quotes that were provided were very clear and very to the point, and we can do the same. Moving on will be great.
Good. Okay. Partner updates, Federal Highways, ODOT, WashDOT. Anybody want to make mention of anything?
I don't have anything.
Okay. Thank you, Rob.
I don't see anybody from FHWA or from WashDOT.
Okay, let's move forward. Invoice approval on the consent agenda. Everybody get a chance to look at the listing. And it's my understanding that this has gone through the budget and funding group. Could I have a motion?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, so it's passed. Good. Committee reports, funding and finance.
Thanks. Go through a bunch of these things. We did a bunch of the usual stuff, including reviewing the financials, review the invoices, including turnaround times on our grant, as asked about earlier. Review the updated project cost estimate, PCE. Discuss 6F mitigation as come up earlier, including the actual dollar amounts, not necessarily defined amounts, but just the concept of figuring out how much those will be with appraisals. We talked about scheduling for hopefully getting our overhead rate calculated by the end of this month, right?
That's the goal.
Yep.
They're working hard.
So we should have that by the end of this month, so we can start using it next month. Also, Moss Adams merged with what's that? I know exactly. Yeah.
Baker Tilly.
Yep. So Moss Adams, who we were contracted with, merged with another company. So we are working through redoing that deal. It's an administrative thing. We have not ended up using OTIB, so that saves us money. Finance committee also worked on the TIPIA presentation we're going to have later in this meeting. We've worked on the RFP for additional audit services, which Commissioner Babbitt was part of. We reviewed budget committee applications, which we'll approve later in this meeting, which we need to edit because there was additional information between that meeting and this one. And then I went down to Salem last Friday and testified regarding House Bill 2184 and Senate Bill 5531, and it seemed to go well.
I just add a comment for anyone who's on another public agency board. We had 6 responsive bids on our audit.
Yes.
Which is rather sort of in recent years that's pretty much unheard of.
Great healthy response.
It's a healthy response. And I don't know if there's any conclusion to be drawn from that. Maybe it's just that this bridge authority is such a dynamic and wonderful agency that people want to be associated with it, but or maybe there's something having to do with the world of finance now. So just interesting side note.
So we had 6 bid for this?
6 that we had to review, which I would have preferred.
7 total
was disqualified.
Okay.
Yep.
And I would have preferred 1 or 2, but we went through all 6.
Yep. Reviewed all 6 of them.
Good.
Took a little bit of extra time, but it was worth it.
Anything else?
No, that's what we did the last couple weeks.
Yeah, good.
2+ weeks.
Eric, how about the engineering construction committee?
Sure. I'm just going to touch on topics and then one idea that we'll get into a little bit because I think everything's been talked about. Progressive design build, we spent time with that. Michael went through that earlier. Christy, wonderful presentation on the rod and the biological opinion, which we spent time on. Funding, we've all heard about that. And I think we know now why we haven't heard any comments back from FHWA on our risk comments, with our attendee taking the early retirement. The one thing that I don't think we brought up that we did talk a little bit is kind of the design lifespan of the bridge. And I think there's been some discussion of 100-year design bridge, which isn't really technically a term. And what we're really trying to work towards are WSDOT and ODOT standards for a bridge, which don't necessarily have a year tied to them. And so I think the discussion around that, the importance is that it's not kind of a neat little snapshot or soundbite. It's more of a standardized procedures and design process that we want to follow and sticking with that. So
at ODOT, there's not there's no higher level aggregation of all those concepts.
Well, we could put Rob on the hook, but I think what it
make it more comfortable.
I think what it
seems like
they have standardized design details and standardized specifications and ways of doing things.
Right.
But for an infrastructure project, you don't label it necessarily with a year duration. And you could get somebody to kind of come in and try to figure that out and say yes or yay or nay. But what we're really doing is we're trying to meet the standards of Washington and Oregon State Department of Transportation.
The way I've heard it now is the way the states term it is that it's a continuous structure. They don't put a time period of like, oh, in 100 years, it's no good anymore. It's with maintenance and upkeep and you know, it can be kind of an undefined period of time. It just depends on that maintenance and upkeep and what you do to the bridge, not like saying, oh, in 100 years, this is no good anymore. I think they've moved away from that. Rob,
I'm not the definitive expert, but I've seen IGAs for bridge projects where that's kind of, there's a fill in the blank slot that says the design lifespan of this is 75 years. That's kind of the going rate for bridges. It could be different for a smaller bridge, but our IGAs usually have something like that.
It just seems like,
but once we get to 75 years, it doesn't mean that we can't make some improvements to the bridge and extend its life.
Yeah. Or that if you do the proper maintenance as you go, that it would not be.
Yeah, half the bridges in Oregon are way past their design life.
And we got one.
Yeah.
So I think the reason that that's important is that it's kind of a little soundbite that I think we've heard different of us using. That's probably not appropriate or necessarily something we can hang something on. So we ought to just be a little bit more diligent about we're following our standards of our state departments of transportation.
Well, I think that there's a little more to it though, because I think that the public needs to know that tax dollars that are being spent and public dollars that are being spent are for an object which will last a long time. And that's why people used to talk about it in terms of the design life. And I would hope that there's some way of reassuring the public that these design standards in turn result in, and I think I'm understanding the terminology you're using, they result in a structure which can be continuously maintained for a very long design life.
Yeah. And you can talk in general terms of like Rob said, like the 75-year, but if you want a hard and fast, like calculated number that somebody can sign off on, there's a lot of effort that gets put in, like hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Lots of money.
That it probably is not worth the value of just saying
It reminds me of there's discussion of 50-year storm and 100-year storm in terms of treatment of wastewater and that sort of thing, and they're sort of switching over to a probabilistic model, which I think makes it less understandable to the public, and it frustrates me that what's that?
less understandable, but more true.
More true, exactly, because I think some people get caught and they say, well, you know, the 50-year storm happens every 10 years or things like that, but it's, I don't know that we really help the public when we get rid of these commonly understood things so they actually have some meaning and replace them with these amorphous concepts that no one understands or can explain. So I'm not thrilled, but I know we don't have a choice. So
I would think you could explain it to the public that we're designing this bridge to all of the standards from the two states. And we're designing this bridge where down the road, we can maintain it. And if we need to, we can put capital money into it and fix it if we need to fix it.
But at the end of that discussion, someone's always going to say, okay, so how many years is it going to last?
Couldn't you just say, you know, kind of what Rob just said, which is that, you know,
75 plus.
Yeah, well, I mean, not just 75 plus, but that, you know, typically, you know, for Oregon and Washington, they're building bridges that are designed to last 75 years. You know, we're following, you know, similar standards. Bridges also typically are maintained well beyond sort of their design lifespan.
I think that it would be helpful to pass this discussion along to the comms committee to figure out what
Way to say it.
he said, yeah. What can be truthfully said. I mean, I like what he said, I don't.
Anything else
to say there?
Eric?
No, I think that was it.
Okay, let's jump down to comms. Anything?
I don't think we have any of the members on today.
Jake Edwards.
Oh, Jake is, I'm sorry. Where's he at? There he is. Jake, are you able to jump on?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, we can.
All right, so piggybacking off what Dan said, the Columbia Gorge News article, the Washington State funding release, we've also extended the current contracts with our lobbyists, Thorn Run, Boswell Consulting, and Summit Strategies. The next communications meeting is this Wednesday. Will we be discussing social media, earned media update, the local information meeting plan that Dan mentioned, and we will be doing discussing website review and website updates.
Good. Okay, let's move on. New business, appoint budget committee members. Who wants to take the lead on that? Would that be Debbie?
Yeah, can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Yay, my computer never likes Zoom. Yeah, so the information that was presented in your packet has changed slightly. And I'm not sure if Kelly or Amy, I do believe, has the updated resolution. Grant Cheney needed to pull his application due to a death in the family. And so we are sending our condolences to him. What that means for the resolution then is that we are recommending to move Teresa Fry from, originally we were going to suggest that she be an alternate. Instead, we are now suggesting that she be appointed to a 3-year position, and then have David Blaze be the alternate, and that the alternate, there is kind of a twist in there in that we did go ahead and say that in the absence of a voting budget committee member that David could be a voting member. And so that's a little bit different than what a lot of us do. But Mark Greeno, our attorney, did agree that we could do that as long as it's pointed out here in the resolution. So that was, we got 4 applications for 2 positions. So that was nice. And I'm sorry that Grant had to pull out, Grant Cheney.
So we have 3 members from last year, correct? They're still there?
We have 4 from last year. There's 6 because there has to be an equal number of budget committee members. Yeah. And so 2, and we had to stagger them when they were appointed last year. So there were 2 people that were appointed for 2 years. One was Grant, who did reapply, and then the other person did not reapply. So we're looking at, and since Grant has pulled his application, then we're looking at just 2 new members. And they will be appointed now to the 3-year position.
Any
And so
further
Amy has brought-
discussion or should we
Yeah,
go
Amy-
ahead and take a resolution? We have a motion to,
Move to approve resolution 2025-2.
Second,
any further discussion on it? Second,
second.
all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, Debbie, you got your team.
Yay, thank you.
Hey, Debbie, can you remind us what day is the
Next week.
starters
Yeah.
coming up? Yeah.
Yes, this next Monday, so exactly a week from today, the meeting starts at 4 o'clock.
Okay, let's move to the next one, which is appoint compliance or adopt compliance with federal grant requirements.
So I just want to say, so we have a board of commissioners meeting next Monday, so I will not be able to attend that. So hopefully we have a quorum without me.
I think we should.
Great. Thanks. I knew there was a reason I was asking that question.
Okay, so who's going to lead us through the federal grant requirements?
Sure. So, well, go ahead.
So this was in response to us being compliant with federal regulations related to grant applications. So we didn't have a policy. So we drafted up a policy for your consideration just to show that we're going to be compliant with what we're asked to be compliant with. And basically that's what it says.
I thought it was the funniest resolution because it's like it says nothing in a lot of words.
Well, you did, yes, you did.
Reassurance.
You didn't have anything that said you would be compliant with whatever you're supposed to be compliant with, so this says you're gonna be compliant with whatever you said you'd be compliant with.
We the other side promise that we the other side promise what we promised.
Yes,
So this went through the compliance.
it was compliant, yes. So.
I just got a giggle reading the thing because it's, I mean, I know why you have to do it and it's just, it's so nothing.
Yeah. So my little, so 2 CFR Part 200.
Yes.
Basically says that you have a process that you follow. And you have to follow your process. But if this resolution just says we follow the 200 process that says we have our own process, where does that end?
So to broaden this out for us is because of our uniqueness in being with 2 states. And because they may have policies that aren't necessarily, people may not feel like they're compliant. We wanted to make sure we were clear on where the authorities stood on how they were handling business. So it was really to help clarify the board's and the authority's position, given that you're not a state DOT. And you don't have something that says kind of where you are.
And CFR is very broad. And then there are some sections that we have to develop other policies and procedures if we need to, such as like our cash management policy that covers that section. We have an invoice approval and payment policy that takes care of that part. So it's an evolving effort to comply with sections.
So as we identify areas that we need processes, we'll either create one or adopt someone's process.
We promise that those processes will be consistent with the processes required.
Yes.
Over through counties.
Exactly.
Crystal clear.
Well, I mean, it kind of is after you read it, but it's like your head spins the first time through.
Okay, can I get a motion from somebody to adopt this resolution?
I move we adopt resolution 2025-3.
Second?
I will second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes. Let's see. Okay, informational items. Anybody want to go through those? That the cool one is we've got $6 million sitting in our account now for from the tolls, which is good.
It's a number, yeah. Keeps going up.
And it's going up.
And what percentage of the expectation are we at?
I think we're down.
We're about it today. Presentation, so yeah.
Save that question.
That's a good question for in a few minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, so Do we need to go through the April financial report, or are you guys fine with it was in the package?
It's included.
Okay, let's go down then to presentations, transportation, infrastructure, finance, and innovation, the TIFIA.
All right, so I'll start this. I'm gonna turn it over to our finance groups and Debbie can add in, but there was during our workshop a few weeks ago, there was a lot of questions around TIFIA and where we were and what the requirements were and when it starts and ends. And so I took all those questions and gave them to PFM and CDM Smith and said, hey, we need to put something together that resolves some of these questions for the commissioners. So they've been working on a presentation to give you all an update. Part of that is to give you a look at where we are today, because some things have changed with interest rates and when we want to access the money. So we want to update you kind of on your base case. And then also give you two different alternative scenarios for if you need additional funding, what does that look like? So they're going to walk you through those, and then I'll let you all ask questions around that as they walk you through it. So Debbie, anything you want to add?
No, I wanted to give a little bit of a lead in, and you did a great job there, Mike. So I don't have as much to say, but yeah, about a year ago, you guys all remember that we did a full-on press, basically how I look at it, to come up with well, we had to get an indicative investment grade rating from a rating agency, and so we did a lot of work. PFM put a lot of effort into that. CDM Smith at that point was relying heavily on the planning level traffic and revenue study that they did, but we were successful in getting an indicative rating, an investment grade rating, indicative, again, a preliminary one basically, for $105 million. But since then, a lot of things have changed. And so, and I think the big part right now that I wanted to point out is the timing. So when we did all that really heavy lifting about a year ago, we were looking at an October 2025 start date for construction. And so there was a real big push to get a lot of information done in a very short amount of time. And shortly after that, CDM Smith went full into an investment grade traffic and revenue study. Now that we've had some changes with the project, including the price and the timing, we've kind of pulled everybody back on that, so that for a couple of reasons. One is that we don't want to expend a lot of money right now. Plus, there's also a time limit on like the traffic and revenue study, how long it's good for. And then also, once we do the formal application to TIFIA, there's a time limit on that as well. So we've kind of pulled back right at this point, but there's some really good questions that you had that we felt needed to be answered. And so the main thing I wanted to point out is that there's a lot of estimates and a lot of assumptions in what you're going to hear coming up. And both CDM Smith and PFM will talk about that. But there's a lot of assumptions that go into this that could change things. Hopefully not a lot, but could change things a little bit into the future. So, but this is kind of where we're at today and how we would forecast going forward to answer some of those really good questions that you have regarding what TIFIA looks like at this point. And with that, I'm going to let each person as they speak introduce themselves, but I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Tyler from CDM Smith to kind of kick off this presentation.
Hey, Debbie, before they start, in your opinion here, would it be best to allow them to get through the presentation and then ask questions at the end and we can go back? Or do it as we go?
Yeah, I think that's probably best, because we've spent a whole lot of time talking, I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice, talking about the flow of this information, because as soon as you see one slide, you're going to have a question that very well is answered on the next slide, because I kept interrupting them the first time they were going through it because I was asking a lot of questions, and they'd be like, oh, that's the next slide, or that's 2 slides down, just, hold on. So it's probably best to let them get through the presentation and then ask your questions at the end.
Go back. So.
With that, I think Tyler.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. So my name is Tyler Grigorchik from CDM Smith, and I'm going to walk you all through our updated TNR stream estimates. And then I'm going to hand it off to PFM to kind of walk through what that means for financing. So first off, we have the results of the baseline scenario that we presented to you before. This includes the 225 Class 1 breeze by opening toll rates, and this includes the 5-year kind of stair-step toll rate increases, beginning with the updated 2032 opening year. So this is assuming 15% toll increases every 5 years. And then just for the rest of this presentation, we did round these toll values to make it a little bit easier for everyone to digest. So this is the baseline TNR stream that we've shown you before. And then we've ran through a couple additional scenarios that we want to share with you today. So these scenarios are based off the toll sensitivity curve that was run for model year 2030. So for the baseline, like I said, we had the 5-year staggered toll rate increases. For these next two scenarios that we're going to walk through, all the toll rates are increased on an annual basis rather than the 5-year stair-step method. So this toll sensitivity curve here is for 2030 because our travel demand model forecast years are 2030 and 2045. So even though the bridge is now forecasted to open in 2032, we ran toll sensitivity for 2030. So what this is showing you here, the red dots are the toll rates that are assumed in the baseline scenario. We have a 150 million TIFIA financing target, which is the green dots of the 330 Class 1 breeze by opening year toll rate, and then a 230 million TIFIA target, which is the $7 toll rate here. So as you see, as you increase your toll rate, you get increasing revenue until you get to that $7 230 million target. And at that point, your revenue actually starts to downturn because your transactions are so low that any increase in toll rate, you're actually, getting a negative return on your toll rate increase. So to go into a little bit of detail on the 150 million target scenario. So this is assuming a 350 2032 opening year toll rate. And again, these tolls are a little bit different from what you saw on the previous slide. The previous slide was assuming, 2030 model year. But since we're looking at a 2032 opening year, these are inflated by a little bit from the previous slide. So with a 350 Class 1 breeze by opening year toll rate, these will increase from 2.8 to 3.4% annually. And this will get you, it is a $1.25 increase over the baseline, or 56%, which will impact transactions by almost 11%, but it'll get you a gross revenue increase of approximately 35%. And then similarly, the 230 million target scenario, by 2032 opening year, the toll rates would be $7.25 for Class 1 breeze by, which is an increase of $5 over the base scenario, or over 200% increase in toll rate. This will translate to a roughly 38% decrease in transactions, but an 85% increase in gross toll revenue.
Yeah, so let me, I'm sorry, I got to jump in here.
Yep.
So what this tells me is that once you hit a certain toll rate, your usage drops down, and you're going down by 38% in this particular example. The concern that I would have is when you declare the benefit of the bridge is to our local community. And if we price the bridge too high and they can't use it.
Right. So these two scenarios are basically just to put these on the board to show you what the results would be. I don't think we're actually, suggesting that we go to the 230 million target toll rate scenario. It's just a scenario that we ran to show you what that impact would be. Basically to show, if we go back to the toll sensitivity curve, that anything past, if you were to increase toll rates, anything past roughly $7 in the 2030 timeframe, so that was, I think, $7.35 by 2032, you're actually going to see, negative returns on your gross annual revenue. So the purpose of this scenario is really more so to show you the inflection point on the revenue, rather than propose this toll rate to you folks as for anything. Does that make sense?
Can I jump in here just for a second, Tyler? I want to make sure everybody's clear that we're not recommending any of this. This is all just for information. And as we progress forward, at some point we may have a recommendation, but right now there's zero recommendation. This is all just for information.
Eric?
Is the negative slope on the transaction line, is that truly a linear line, or is that actually, seems like that would have some sort of curve on it, and we're seeing it all negative in any increase, which isn't good for our community.
Right. I mean, it is actually a little bit curved on the edges. But in general, anytime you increase a toll rate, there is going to be a negative impact towards transactions. So even if you were to increase by 5 cents, the math, the elasticity of the demand shows that you're going to have a negative slope. So anytime your transaction, your toll rate goes up, you're generally going to see a decrease in transactions, which I believe is what we saw during the previous toll increase.
And I guess what we're looking for as we think about this and look for what's best for the community, you're looking for the flattest slope on that negative line, which would indicate the least impact to the local residents.
Really, you're really looking at what point do you what's something that you feel like the community could support, and what is your maximum ability to leverage your tolling. So one other way to look at this is that if we needed another $50 million for the project, you would have to increase the tolls to 330 to obtain that number.
Right.
So it gives you an idea of what the locals could support related to this project. So it kind of tells you, if you look at even the highest amount the locals could contribute through tolling, the locals could only ever, I won't say ever, 230 million is your maximum ability to support this project. If you would ever even consider a $7 toll, which seems very unrealistic. Yeah. So I think your most realistic probable would be if you went to 330, you could only generate another 50 million. So if this project had a bigger hole, negative funding gap than $50 million, it cannot be supported by the locals.
Right. And that basically taps out all the maximum
local contribution.
Local contributions.
Yeah.
Can you remind me, the baseline, is that the 105 million?
That's what was 105, and you'll see that that's been changed slightly.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead. So much for no questions. I knew we weren't going to make it. But
no, thank you for clearing that up. I appreciate it. So then the final slide here is just the toll rate comparisons from the three scenarios. So the yellow is the baseline scenario that we were talking about originally, which includes the 5-year stair-step based 15% increases, and then the 150 with the green being closest to the baseline toll rates, and then the 230, which is kind of further out there. But that's all I have. So if there's any additional questions for me before I hand it over to PFM to kind of walk through the funding and the financial part of it.
Yeah, just what is the total number of years that this scenario presumes?
So our modeling scenario goes out to 2065.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I think that brings up our team at PFM. I think Brad's going to kick us off and Mudra is going to walk through some slides. So I'll hand it to Brad.
Yeah, Mudra, if you want to share, since you're going to be going over the middle part, I'll take the beginning, and then, like we said, Peter's going to round out the conclusion for us.
Sounds good. I'll share. Can folks see my screen?
Yes. Yes. So on the first slide, Debbie gave a pretty good overview of what we're trying to do here. Basically, we're trying to update the plan of finance, put a bow around it, and leave you with a sense of, all right, we understand how much financing capacity can we do. We wanted to talk to y'all a little bit about some of the DSRF requirements, how the toll increment's being utilized. And we've made some changes to that plan of finance. As you kind of saw a preview on the traffic and revenue slides, we were also, for illustration purposes, asked to say, what would the financing potential be under different hypothetical toll rate scenarios, right? So that's what, the targets, and that's kind of what we came up with, or what CDM came up with based on and kind of an iterative basis with us on what we could actually finance. So if we go to the next slide, I want to talk about where we're at and what the inputs are, for the project here. So we updated the market rates.
Hey, Mudra, can you full screen that?
Yeah, I am. It's full screen, but it's on the wrong screen. So let me just try it.
If you just drag it over, it'll pop up.
Okay.
Slideshow.
Yeah, don't think that worked.
Or I can try for mine.
What I can do is,
In the presenter's view, she can switch it to slideshow.
This should work.
That's on a different screen.
Can folks?
We're still seeing your presenter one.
Mm-hmm.
Here.
Oh, Brad and I.
Let me try. I only have one screen in front of me at this time, so maybe this will be smoother. And if I go here, is it now full screen?
Give it just a second. Yeah, we're good. Go ahead. Sorry. Thank you.
Okay. So what we're trying to do here is show y'all the new financing capacity based on everything that has changed. And by meaning everything, we have new updated traffic and revenue forecasts. That's what CDM Smith has put together at an investment grade level. So this is taking the older planning model and advancing it with updated traffic underlying it, with all their updated assumptions, with their best methodology of the traffic and revenue. We have a new opening date. So we have pushed back the financing 2 years. So basically the whole curve and when we're going to go about that financing has moved out. And then we've also changed when we're going to draw the TIFIA loan. In the past, we had the TIFIA loan coming out drawing at the very end as the last dollars in. Because of different cash flow considerations, working with the project team, knowing that we might have to have some kind of an interim financing to be conservative in this case, we actually accelerated our TIFIA loan draws earlier into the process. And we have some detailed slides to kind of show you what that looks like and what that means. So You have in your possession a traffic and revenue report as well as a forecast from CDM Smith. So that report and those numbers will directly tie to this presentation. As well, HNTB went through and took those tolling transactions, went through their model and gave us new tolling transaction costs, as well as new roadway or bridge O&M costs. So all of this is what we packaged together inside of a new plan of finance. And we did give you guys a couple of sensitivities so you could see, as the project costs have risen, what is a real share that toll revenue financing could actually contribute to your project. We simply are not able to run up toll rates on an unlimited basis. CDM just showed you $7 is the maximum rate. There is a realistic that the public can support, that the spirit of the project for the localities can actually do as well. So what we're trying to do here is give y'all some different benchmarks and some bookends to better understand that. If it comes up, we'll just raise tolls. You'll be able to deliver more money. That's true, but very limited. So Mudra, why don't you take us through the next handful of slides and talk about the results?
Thanks, Brad. So we'll kind of just go straight to the punchline. Brad walked you through all the new inputs that went in. So updated revenue curve, updated costs, updated timing on TIFIA draws, and with that, the capacity, and obviously updated market rates. With that, the baseline capacity now is 93 million. And as CDM Smith pointed out, in order to support the 93, the baseline toll rates are 225, and that's opening year. So that's 2032, not 2030 model year that CDM Smith was referencing. And from the 225, you'd need 15% toll increases every 5 years to support that 93 million baseline capacity. If you see in the chart, you're seeing net revenues, not gross revenues. So we took the O&M costs that HNTB gave us. You have to pay those first. Then you have net revenues, which you can use to securitize your TIFIA loan. So that's what you're seeing on the chart. You are also seeing that we can't leverage every single dollar of that net revenues. You can see the debt service bars are slightly lower than the revenues, and that's the coverage concept. So we have to build in some debt service coverage to build in some cushion to get to the investment grade rating for TIFIA. And so we've built all of that into our structure, the coverage requirements and the new interest rate assumptions, all of that. And your new baseline, again, it's 93 million. And the other piece that goes with the 93 million is how much is the authority going to need in order for the other reserves that it needs to fund. And so that's the table at the bottom that you're seeing to fund your TIFIA reserve fund, to fund certain other O&M and R&R reserve fund, pay cost of issuance, all of that. You're going to need about 14.8 million, round up to 15 million in authority funds to support that $93 million TIFIA. And the last piece of information on this page is the sensitivity for interest rates. So if interest rates for 50 basis points are 0.5% better, your capacity would improve by 10 million. So 103 million TIFIA capacity. And that's kind of, it's not exactly linear, but back of the envelope, that works. Every 50 basis points, 0.5% gives you about 10 million in capacity. And with that, we can go to the next page. And so the question came up, you were used to seeing the $105 million number, and now that baseline capacity is 93 million. What's changed? We touched on this, but the biggest input that changed was the revenue forecast. So that compared to the prior forecast, revenue forecast that we have now is 12 to 15% lower. The other important piece that goes into the analysis is the TIFIA draw assumption. We accelerated those draws. We were assuming we'd need TIFIA towards the end of construction, perhaps even for demolition only. So that was maybe year 5, year 6 of construction. And now we're saying that we might need TIFIA in year 1 of construction. And so that accelerating TIFIA kind of results in a negative impact on capacity. So those are the two that affect capacity negatively. The one thing that we changed, the third factor here, is the interest rate assumptions. The interest rate that TIFIA is going to give you at closing is 30-year US Treasury rate. That the day of closing, that's the rate that you're going to lock in for TIFIA. But leading up to the process, you're going to have to assume some cushion in it, about 0.5% extra for your analytics. Again, since we're not close to that mark, we're still away from certain milestones that you need for TIFIA. That is, you need a fully funded plan of finance, and you have to be ready for construction. So once you close TIFIA, construction must begin in 90 days. And so again, we're not close to those project milestones at the moment. And so we're not building in any cushion, giving you a realistic picture of interest rates using rates as of April 1st, which is 4.5%. Compared to last year, again, treasury rates were roughly the same. The difference is that we used to have that cushion of about 0.5% extra and 75 basis point extra, which we've stripped out again because we're so far away from hitting those TIFIA milestones and kind of restarting the TIFIA process. And what this does is the rounded 4.5 also gives you some back of the envelope ability to do some back of the envelope calculation as you track treasury rates in the market. If that moves, as I mentioned in the previous slide, every 50 basis point or 0.5% moves gives you 10 million in capacity. And so that kind of gives you some ability to back of the envelope calculations as we put pencils down on our end.
Yeah, the current interest rates are fairly high. The 30-year treasury right now is actually, more around that 4.75 mark. So given that it's 2 years out, hopefully interest rates are going to go down in the next couple of years. Who knows? But we felt like we didn't want to unduly penalize a project 2 years away. When we looked at the historic averages of 30-year treasuries, all the historic indices were much lower than the current level. So we basically stuck with the current level with the hope that rates will go down. If rates, in fact, do stay up, we would revisit that financing capacity at that point in time when your rest of your funding plan came into better focus.
A question for you. In the current analysis, you're saying that you want to touch 80 million of the TIFIA draw in 27. That would help pay for the I call it cost of capital, but it's your
working 90-day working capital.
Yeah. Is that sufficient?
For your general withdrawals, yes. If there is a large early procurement that needs to happen, it may not be. But
well, I can
general month to month, yes. But no, we did not include like a major early purchase that would.
See, I can see you're going to have a big one with steel.
Yeah, and that may need to be funded. That may have to be done some other way. So this was more to cover your long-term general costs.
Okay.
Just because you don't probably have enough TIFIA available to actually do a major and that as well. So.
Yeah, and we have a slide in a couple that will kind of show you where we pulled those TIFIA draws in this one versus the last one as well.
Thanks, Brad. And so, as Brad mentioned, we've run a few different kinds of sensitivity analysis for you. So we talked about the interest rate sensitivity and impact on TIFIA capacity. This one is toll rate sensitivity. And essentially, this summarizes the entire CDM Smith presentation in one table. And so we saw the baseline capacity now is 93 million, and the starting year 2032 toll rate to support that would have to be 225. We also saw that if you increase toll rates, you're going to see higher revenues. You do lose traffic, but you're going to see higher revenues. But there's only a point till which you can push that, after which you have diminishing returns. And that point we saw was $7 2030, but $7.25 in terms of the 2032 start of operations toll rate. Again, we're not recommending these scenarios. This is to just establish bookends, your base case, and then sort of your highest max case. And then something in between, we ran another intermediate scenario about 150 million TIFIA capacity. And in order to get that, you would need toll rates to starting your toll rates at 350 and then obviously increasing every year thereafter. But if you go there, again, you lose traffic. That's 11% drop in traffic. And that is the first takeaway. That again, if you try to enhance your TIFIA capacity, there will be some drop in traffic that you have to kind of assess. The other takeaway is non-linearity of this. So going from 93 to 150 million, that's a 60% increase in your TIFIA capacity. And at the same time, you need an equivalent rate increase, which is about 56%. And so there's some equivalency in that, TIFIA capacity and rate increase. But beyond that, going from 93 to 230, that's only 140% increase in capacity, but to achieve that, it's 222% increase in rate. So again, it's not exactly linear, but this gives you some sensitivity cases, sets bookends and an intermediate scenario, and sort of puts numbers on your trade-offs. So yes, you can enhance capacity. You could fill some of your funding gap in order to deliver your project. But at the same time, you'd have to raise rates in order to do that. And you do lose traffic and cost diversion in order to do that. So this table kind of lays out all those trade-offs and kind of imposes some numbers and some magnitude on those trade-offs for your consideration.
Major, can you cover real quick when, like when you do your first draw, what happens? You have a kind of a delay period in there of 5 years. Can you cover that again for the commissioners of how that works?
For TIFIA draws?
Yeah. Do you have, I don't remember if you have that on a slide. If you do, then.
We do.
Okay,
so
go ahead. Sorry.
And so that's the third sensitivity we ran for you. So you saw interest rate sensitivity, toll rate sensitivity. This is the TIFIA draws. So again, I think current assumption is that we need 80 million upfront, but we might need, I think we're on the wrong page. Can we go back up one?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no worries. And so, but our prior assumption was that we would need TIFIA towards the end, and only for demolition, but or towards the end of construction, so year 4, year 5. And the impact of that is what you can see in the table to the bottom left. If you draw TIFIA early, and you're not paying any interest, that unpaid interest sort of accretes into the loan balance. And so the loan balance keeps growing until you kind of start paying interest. And so you can see that if you were to defer the TIFIA draw, obviously the accretion is slower, and so your balance is slower. So again, reminder that your revenue stream that's available to you to pay debt service is the same, right? But to accommodate now this accretion and to be able to pay off a higher loan balance, you just have to start with sort of a lower number, or you have a lower TIFIA borrowing in order to kind of accommodate the accretion. And so that's the impact of kind of drawing TIFIA early versus kind of being able to defer the draws. Now we recognize there is a cash flow shortfall as things stand today. But again, I don't think we have all the pieces of the puzzle, right? We're still kind of looking for additional funding sources to plug the gap. And so once we have a fuller picture, we can come and revisit and see what other financial alternatives that are available to us in order to be able to defer the TIFIA draw. But what we wanted you to take away from this is that, there is a meaningful boost to TIFIA capacity if you were able to achieve that and come up with strategies so as to push TIFIA draws a little bit later in the construction process.
So this really kind of pushes us to really push for reimburse on invoice, so we don't have to do this.
I think you
may have to do some
to some level. It would maybe reduce that 80 to a lower number, but I think you're still going to have some early withdrawal of TIFIA to really have something on hand.
But just because versus 20 is a big change.
Could be, yeah. Anything you can do to lower that would help you.
It would also help if you were able to talk federal highways into front loading some of the grant money once we have it fully funded.
Yeah, if you could get some front loaded money out of one of the states or out of the feds, I mean, obviously anything you can reduce that early withdrawal, the need to, what is going to help you.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. What happens is, like Muja said, when that loan balance grows, it adds more debt service, which hurts our debt service coverage ratio. So that's why it's impacting you. So if we don't have to grow it, right, we're able to fit more debt underneath it.
Right. And then we know that you had a lot of questions around DSRF funding and other funding requirements, and how much you're going to need from those authority funds from the incremental toll revenues that's being allocated to the authority and is accumulating. And so this should help summarize. First and foremost, the TIFIA Reserve Fund. that again, the funding, how much do you need? That's the funding formula. It's industry standard, and based on all the various scenarios that we showed you, you could need about anywhere from 8 million to 17 million. Under the 150 million scenario, that number is about 11.6 million. And so that's the reserve fund. You can see the 150 million sources and uses table to the bottom right for reference. In terms of timing, that's subject to negotiation as to when we fund this reserve fund. You don't necessarily have to fund it at closing. We could fund it at first draw, or we could even fund it at project completion, again, subject to negotiation. And so but those are kind of your bookends in terms of when you need those funds. You don't need them at closing necessarily. Beyond the reserve fund, what else do you need? There's an O&M reserve and an R&R reserve that you're going to have to fund. Again, both in terms of timing, you're going to need that as soon as the road opens, or as soon as you finish construction. So, end of 2031 and the road opens in 2032. So that's the timing on those additional funds. And then again, for TIFIA cost of issuance, authorities cost of issuance, that will be along the way. So over the next 2 years, as you kind of spend money and get closer to closing on the loan, you'll need some funds there for cost of issuance. In aggregate, so that number doesn't change. So O&M reserve, R&R reserve, and your cost of issuance, we estimate in total you're going to need about 7.3 million. That doesn't change. The TIFIA reserve, depending on the scenario, that is what changes. But under the 150 million in aggregate, you need about 18.9 million, round that up to 19 million. And you can see in the chart, and we heard that the current balance is 6 million in that account. Our slide's a little bit stale, I think a month older. But you can see that's the dark blue line. That's the actual balance. The light blue, which kind of forecasts about 4 million that you add to the fund every year, along with some interest income. And so that's the light blue, the forecast. And then in terms of reserve funding, that's the yellow line. You're going to need a little bit upfront to fund your cost of issuance. Like I mentioned, you're going to need a bulk of that other authority funds in sort of towards the end, around 2031, end of 2031, when the road opens. And so, and even after that, you have about 14.8 million estimated balance. And so you have some room to play. You're able to afford $150 million TIFIA loan and fund all of the reserves in connection with that loan amount, and still have some funds left over. And so with that, if there are any questions, we can address them, or I can turn it over to Peter to help us close.
Can you explain why we need to have get to 31 million by 2031 in additional reserve? Like, why can't that money just be used to pay down the loan?
You could. There's multiple uses, and I think Peter will kind of touch on that. There's multiple uses to that revenue stream, right? And so you could use it to pay interest. You could use it to actually pay for some project costs as you're needing some monies up front. There's multiple ways you can leverage that stream, and I'll let Peter address some of that on the next slide. Peter.
Okay. Yeah, you segued to our conclusion slide. Thank you. So a lot of information there. We just want to leave with a few takeaways because folks may be focused on other things in the coming months, and we just wanted a concise set of takeaways from the financial analysis coming off the updated traffic and revenue numbers. So these are them. Current market, or at least assuming a 4.5% rate, the borrowing capacity is 93 million. That does assume the $80 million draw earlier in the project delivery life cycle. So 93 million is current borrowing capacity at 4.5%. If the authority wanted to increase that amount up to about 150 million, we could see what the impact on tolls would be from 225 to 355. And then rule of thumb, as interest rates swing one way or the other, 0.5% or 50 basis points, that impacts the borrowing capacity by 10 million. And just to give you a sense, between early April and today, we've seen interest rates move about 50 basis points. So that's why we're sticking at the historic averages, but we know that interest rates will continue to be volatile. Hopefully they move in our direction. That's the impact, 10 million per 0.5% change. And we will need to keep thinking about several open topics, and that's the ongoing considerations. The first is to the prior question: what's the best and highest and best use of the total revenue account, or the dollars therein? And there are options, and we need to think about the various colors of money, the timing of those dollars, when they will be accessible to the authority for costs. But thinking about eligible uses, one is we need a certain amount of those to fund the debt service reserve fund, and Mudra laid out the range of that. It could directly pay interest costs, to the prior comment. Perhaps we use some of that to secure a line of credit and provide some liquidity during project construction. How much could that be? We will come back to that and think about that. So that is an open and ongoing consideration that will evolve as you identify different funding sources and the timing of those funding sources, as well as the timing of your draw on the TIFIA loan. We'll come back and define the specific sizing of the debt service reserve fund. It's going to be fairly formulaic. So we suggest there's no immediate need to put a pin on that, the size and timing of the debt service reserve fund. And as part of the first consideration, this really goes back to, are there other strategies we can think about to provide liquidity through project delivery versus an early draw on the TIFIA loan? I think the conclusion is those are limited. We have looked fairly closely at other interim and short-term borrowing strategies, but there are a couple. The first is going right back to the total revenue account, the best way to use those dollars, either directly as a funding source or to leverage, say, through a commercial bank. There are other strategies which we will come to as you get closer to closing, which is if you could close on a TIFIA loan at 4.5%, which is a 30-year treasury, we have, for other projects, issued short-term notes to get us to construction. And in a normal interest rate environment, the yield curve, we could issue a 3-year construction note at, say, 2%. And take that out with the TIFIA loan that's 4.5%. So perhaps we can stratify some borrowing strategies and do a short-term note at a lower percent, say 2%, and eventually use the 4.5% draw on the TIFIA loan to refinance that. All of those we suggest, we know they're good questions and they've been presented. We want to do a couple things. One, show you that we're thinking about them. And then two, the time to nail down those specific strategies will be at a point in the future, as the other, again, funding sources, timing, project costs, timing become a little better defined. So now with that, we'll pause and take questions.
Well, question for you. If you go back, a couple of slides where you were showing the toll rates for class 1 and a class 5. Class 5 is a semi. The question that I would have, do you guys do some kind of a survey that at $35 a trip, would you expect to see fall off from business? Where's that sweet spot on business?
So I don't know. I want to clarify. Class 5 is a 5-axle truck, and I know that CDM Smith did, or they actually subcontracted a survey on trucking. And Tyler, I don't know. My screen doesn't show. I assume you're still here. I don't know if you can speak to that. I know that they did do the truck survey for the traffic and revenue survey.
Yeah, I know we do have results available. I'd have to take a look through the report. I don't have those offhand. I apologize.
Do you recall what percentage trucks are of our overall percentage?
Obviously they're a higher percent of revenue than they are of transactions because they pay a higher price. And I also believe that is another area that we probably need to spend a little more time on, because the port had traditionally seen trucks as economic development. And I believe and I'm probably going to be way out over where I should be talking at this point, but I do know that there have been some comments from other toll agencies that our truck rates are somewhat low because they do more damage to the bridge, but the port has seen them as economic development and therefore given them a bit lower rate than they might otherwise have done. So there's probably a little more work to be done on that piece at this time as we get closer and closer towards the actual construction of the bridge and the actual closing of the Tiffy loan.
Last month it was 663 trips versus just under 300,000 trips for cars.
Pretty small percentage, I think.
It's a very small percentage
it's a very small percentage of transactions.
Yes.
Sorry, but I also wanted to just point out that the truck tolls, and there's class 4, class 5, class 6 that goes all the way up with the number of axles on a truck. They are a multiple, and in the current system on the existing bridge, the per axle is a multiple of the automobile breeze by toll, and you can see that is preserved through here. So the breeze by toll for a class 5 truck is 10 times what it is for a class 1 vehicle, and even in the $230 million scenario, it's $7.25 or $72.80, about 10 times the amount. So the scenarios that CDM Smith developed preserve the current ratio of truck tolls versus automobile tolls.
But a 5-axle truck last month, there was about $10,000 in tolls generated versus $532,000 for cars.
But is that because the limitations on the bridge?
That's probably part of it. But even so, if you just look at the percentages, it doesn't even register.
Pretty small.
It's 1.9%.
Right. I was just going to say from our end on the transaction basis, trucks make up 1.9% of transactions in 2024, but approximately 8.2% of the gross toll revenue. And that's because of what Debbie said, the higher toll rates. So.
Okay. Thank you.
That's a good point, though, like especially with having a free bridge in the Dalles and in the 205, like understanding really where the elasticity is for trucks, how much, we can charge them before they start to divert to one of the other bridges. Worth at least looking at some point, or maybe they already have looked at it, and that's
right. And it's really not an easy answer of this is the toll point. I think it depends a lot on the specific origin and destination of your trucks. If it's a long distance through trip, it doesn't matter what your alternative matters much less than if either your origin or destination or both is directly on one or the other side of the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there is a lot that goes into it because it's not just the cost of, or whether it's a free crossing or the cost. There's also the speed. If you're on Highway 14, it's much slower. Well, I don't know about much. Actually, I think I was a little surprised that it wasn't as much slower as I would have expected, but it is slower on Highway 14. There's also, I believe, some limitations in various areas on Highway 14 as to where trucks can go. And obviously, Interstate 84 is a much straight through, faster route for trucks too. So there is a lot that goes into the truck analysis that takes a little more work.
And that all will be, whether it's developed yet or not at this level of detail, there is a very detailed discussion of that in an investment grade traffic and revenue study. And included in all of that is also a value of time. That there is actually a dollar value assigned to time.
Trucks
I
seem to be
think
more
it'd be helpful
economic
if,
based.
I think it'd be helpful if we could get copies of all these slides.
Yeah. We're gonna post them and send them out after the meeting.
Sure.
Any other questions for the group here?
So is there a plan to update the sensitivity analysis? Specifically what behaviors do we expect? Is that what's
part of it?
Is that part of the investment grade? Is that what I just heard from Carrie?
Yeah.
Yeah, as we get, I just want to make sure everybody's understand, as we get closer to actually applying for a TIFIA loan. So far where we're at in the process right now is we've presented a letter of interest to TIFIA. That's your first official step. And we did that. And so at some point we actually have to do a true application. And so, but again, as I believe Brad pointed out, you have to be pretty much ready to go to construction. You have to be fully funded and then go to construction within 90 days. So we can't do that too soon. But when we get closer to knowing that date, there's going to be a lot more analysis that's going to go into this again in order to, and we'll actually have to go before a rating agency to get a true rating. What we have right now is indicative, or another, like a preliminary rating. And we have to go get an actual rating before we do the TIFIA application. So there's a significant amount of work left to be done before we actually do a TIFIA application. But we can't do that work too soon, or it'll just be wasted time. So
Well, the offset to that, Debbie, is frankly, we don't know what the total price is yet.
Right.
It keeps moving to the right. So I think your discussion that you had here will help us set a revised funding strategy and trying to predict what that endpoint's going to be and what component of TIFIA could it fulfill.
yes, and that was kind of our goal, is that, hopefully we get a lot of grants, and when the states have, well, at least Washington has obviously come through, and hopefully Oregon will. And so, but if we're, a few million short, then this was to give you an idea of, what kind of funding shortage we could fill with TIFIA. And then what I guess the toll rates, at least just again, with the estimates that we have today, what that would be.
Yeah, I think the sensitivities are better informed in the future when you have a better handle of, one, what the environment is with everything, right? Even gasoline prices. And then, usually you're going to have a few sensitivities. And then oftentimes TIFIA and the TIFIA advisor, their TNR advisor, will request a rating potential case as well as the rating agencies, right? So they are going to have to spin one up if they say, hey, I want you to change this and that and give me a new forecast because I want to see how that fares against your debt service that you're projecting out. So once everything is kind of set and we're kind of moving back in the positive way, I think you'll have time to request those sensitivities. And then ultimately the financial markets would likely request one as well.
Right. Okay, so this is part of our journey.
So basically hoping for lower interest rates and higher trucker salaries.
Higher vehicles and lower interest rates. More cars and less interest.
Yeah, more economic activity regionally. Yeah.
And more federal and state funding.
Okay, thank you, guys. Hey, let's move into committee workshop. Remember, if you look at your last page in your package, we said that we would add an hour to this meeting to consider where we are in our committees. And Mike put together some questions to kind of help us with the discussion. And I got myself out of sequence here, so let me see if I can find mine.
Page 39.
I've got it.
The last,
yep, got it. Okay. Okay, so maybe we use this to start off with. And How does everybody feel about the number of committees that we have and what they cover? Is there any concerns there? Again, we have governance, we have communications, we have engineering construction, and we have budget and finance.
I guess I would say the Governance and Revenue Committee does not have a lot of meaty issues to deal with. Most of the issues we deal with, staff has done the work on, and I understand that there's a need for us as committee members to kind of give a nod on it before it gets brought to the broader group. But I would bet that more than half of the stuff we do, or maybe even more than that, could just be placed directly onto committee, full commission agendas if we wanted, and there wouldn't be a lot lost in that process. Or conversely, you could say adding to the responsibilities of that group might not be a.
How about the rest of the commission or the authority? Do you agree with what Arthur was saying?
I don't disagree with it.
I think he brings a.
Doug and Jake are in the committee, so they may have a better visibility because they've been in the committee meetings, which are pretty sparse and pretty simple.
I think when we started this, you guys also had a much, like, the scope of work for your group was pretty different, right? I mean, like, there were some foundational documents that you took in the charter and things like that, that your group, was, were point on developing.
Right, so we chew those up, spit them out, and they're not there anymore.
Well, one thing maybe to kick around is at some point in time, I think you're going to need an executive director. Now, is there some policy documentation around that maybe makes sense holding the committee together for?
I'm not saying get rid of the committee, but I would expect on that also that most of what the committee members would be doing would be making sure that staff has the right questions as staff prepares the broader documents of what that.
But I think
position looks like.
There's lots of different ways you could do it, but you could have this committee basically recommending who should we hire, go through that whole process as permanent staff come on. And this is over a period of time. It's not just a month, but years.
Do you mean as a hiring committee or as a hiring recommendation committee?
Yeah.
Well, beyond that a little bit as well, like just in how would a permanent staff and executive director interact with the board and HNPD and sort of what, because that is a whole new kind of scope and role that we don't currently have, like beyond just sort of like who is the right person or who are the right people.
Right. So absolutely in working out that scope, I think there's going to be sort of a stair step of work. But again, that is done at the time when you have your person brought on.
It seems to me that every step in the evolution of this agency, the authority, there's probably a big lift on the governance thing to make sure that what we set up serves the next evolution or as the authority matures and takes on different tasks and everything. There's probably some sort of
as we get closer to construction and finishing up construction, then you got to start thinking about maintenance and long-term things like that.
I'm not arguing that this isn't a useful concept. I'm simply saying that right now our workload is pretty easy. I think that's
well, how about if we
sees a need for a new committee? I haven't heard of anybody.
That doesn't suggest the need for a new committee in that area. I don't know if there are any tasks or any responsibilities you'd want to shift into that committee, but I haven't looked through the list. I'm not sure if anything would make sense. But
well, to me, you keep the committee going, but if you don't have anything to do, don't meet.
Okay. So no new committees.
Well,
or at least
we haven't gone through the second one here. So let's go to the second one. Do the existing committees need to be modified in some?
Talk about them all, and then we'll come back and see if we can answer.
I was just trying to get you guys to know.
I know you're trying to check them off. I know. Project manager.
So
Sorry, I interrupted.
I'm just going to throw it out on the table. The way ENC has worked, and Eric and Catherine jump in, we've tried to keep our committee really balanced. We have, I think, good discussions about where the project is and where it's going. And probably more tuned in to the pulse of the project than some of the other committees, just because that's what we are. And now, is that a problem to some of the other committees?
Yes, not to the other committees, but I know that Marla brought this issue up, and I share her feeling that, for example, when the dollar increase, the price tag knowledge started to be understood, that by the time we learned about it, it was too late to have any significant influence on the direction or decisions. That pretty much all the homework had been done. It's like, okay, well, if this is the problem, this is so. And people are problem solvers. They see the problem and then they work on solving it. And then by the time we saw it, it's like, here's the problem and here's the answer. It's like, wait a minute, we had no role in that answer.
How would you suggest we do something different?
I think that the committee, so in that particular place, I think there was a lot of, I think I would go back a couple of steps and I would say that the way that HNTB dealt with the knowledge that the peers would have to be deeper should have resulted in a statement that the financial models that we have or the cost models that we have are no longer operative. And that would have been sort of a heads up that, okay, we're in this amorphous state right now where we don't really have a model, but we know there's going to be more. But because we have no design or even design, we don't know how much more. And I mean, I completely understand the reason. What I was told, I think what Mike told us, is that the reason we didn't tell you that was because we didn't have anything to replace it with, so we had to have something to work with. And I get that, but I'm not sure I agree with that. But the people in the ENC committee certainly had a better appreciation, better understanding of the magnitude and potential for those changes than the rest of us did, and therefore we were out saying things that weren't true, and we were out presuming things that turned out to be way off. And I don't like being in that position. So
one of the things I've been talking with Mike about is this thing called a trend program. And a trend program, you have your baseline, which is we're going to build a bridge, and the bridge looks like this. Okay. Now, if something starts to change, you write a trend that says, hey, it looks like we're going to change this particular design from A to something other than A, and it could have an impact on schedule, it could have an impact on cost of this kind of range.
Right.
And doing something like that formally and bringing it to the authority periodically may help communicate.
I think that would be really helpful. Yeah, but let me add another piece to it. And I'll just be really candid. I have the feeling that there are certain commissioners who have a pretty strong idea for what's going to happen when push comes to shove on price. And I haven't been part of that discussion, and therefore I think that there are some expectations or some perceived likelihood of what you change in quote unquote value engineering, or what you cut and what becomes what in the design looks radically different. or notably different, I should say, not radically, notably different. And I have suspicions of that, but I don't have any actual knowledge of that. And we should all share knowledge if there is anything. And if there's not, then I'm just being paranoid.
So one way to deal with that perhaps is, excuse me, have a standard agenda on the meeting note that what is occurring that's potential change on the project, and spend 10 minutes, 15 minutes briefing you on it. And if you want more than that, go get a hold of Mike, go get a hold of one of the other committees to jump into it. I personally think all of us have to have a good understanding of what we're trying to do here.
In the public.
Yeah.
Right.
How about the rest of you? Eric?
Well, I'm chewing on how do we break down the silos between the committees? Because I mean, government committee, you guys went through and you built up a lot of baseline and charters and everything. I have a general sense of what's there.
Right.
That's about it. And it's probably similar on the engineering and construction. You have a general sense of what's there, but not a lot of detail. I think any one of us, if we kind of went through that, that's probably common with all of the committees. And I think that's probably one of the fundamental problems that we're struggling with, is that we all have a general sense of what we think's going on. And so when something isn't what we thought, then there are questions, and that erodes trust. And we're siloed, so we don't have any real view into what the other committees are doing other than what we assume. So until we can kind of break that down, I think that's always going to be something.
I would offer that was done on purpose, not to create silos, but for efficiency of elevating discussions and decisions. To bring up to speed 12 members at once means all of those committee meetings we might as well do in this meeting and make this a 8-hour meeting. The idea of the committees, I think, was that you allocated individual people to elevate discussions when they needed, and you weren't going to know everything that committee was going to do. And I think you have to trust that the people that you have in those committees are going to elevate an issue when it needs to be, and that you may not know every detail of what goes on in those committee discussions. Because if you want to know every detail and be intimately in each one of them, then you're going to have, and you can't have everybody in every committee, or you're going to put it all in one meeting, which means your 3-hour meeting is now an 8-hour meeting.
I understand that. I think what goes back to is the common understanding of when things get elevated and a level of trust among the committees that's being done correctly and well. And I think, I mean, you brought up the cost increase.
And I think
I'm sure it could have been handled better than it was.
So yeah, the right way to do it is you bring it up when you feel like there was something that wasn't elevated as quickly as you would, so that committee understands, okay, hey, we need to bring this up quicker and in a different way. I don't know that anything was done wrong. It was just that, hey, this information would have been better known to everybody than what you thought, right? And that committee made a decision based on when they thought they had enough information to bring it to everyone. And if that wasn't as early as others expected, that's something they just need to adjust to.
Well, what I remember from that situation as well, was that we were talking about sort of the deeper pilings for a long time before we knew what the magnitude of the cost increase was. And we kept kind of poking at it and being like, what is it? What is it? What is it? And then we had, I think, like a grant application that was due. And all of a sudden it was like, okay, there's the number. And I think some people were more surprised by that number maybe than other people. And from my perspective, I guess, which, I don't expect everybody would agree with, I think it's hard to ask people to, without, who aren't, have more information, but not complete information to put their kind of a number on the line to say like what does Mike think is the number? What does Eric think is the number? What does Mike Shannon think is the number, before the actual number comes out?
Oh, so you're dealing with a whole bunch of opinions instead of facts.
To put a finer edge on that point, though.
Still like not fact, but
to put a finer edge on that point, I learned about it immediately after a meeting that I chaired where we said different things to the Oregon and Washington legislature than other people in the room knew. And so that obviously is going to leave me feeling very, very uncomfortable. And I would assert that the knowledge of our internal governance discussions about what quorum rule options we have is going to be of less general interest and less interest to the public, less interest to the political world than a discussion of, hey, do we have a bike lane or not? Right. And I think that there is different people have spent different amounts of time or have taken the consideration of what price cutting or what cost cutting looks like to different degrees, and the lack of knowledge. My discomfort is that I believe that people have started to bake into all the discussions certain assumptions which I haven't yet been privy to.
Yeah, and I think I know what you're talking about. I think part of that is because someone mentions, hey, we should do X, that doesn't mean we're doing X, right? And I think that if you hear that, it needs to just come up that, hey, if I've heard rumors that you're thinking about, for example, I've heard rumors you're going to delete all the bike lanes to save money. I'd like to understand more about why you would make that decision, and that decision hasn't been made. It's not going to be made, and we're not heading in that direction because it's a very minimal difference in cost, and it doesn't really save anything and probably causes more issues than it solves. But I think that's where there will be rumors as we go through design, and we're going to try to, as we get into 1B, have key milestones where we update folks on what's going on. And I think some of those decisions like that would need to come to the full board. I don't think any of the committees have that kind of level of decision-making authorized to them. Now, are they going to talk about it? Is it something somebody's going to throw out? Potentially, but I would trust that each committee would understand that level of a decision has to require full board discussion, that they can't unilaterally make that decision. And then I would say the same thing for the engineering group that's doing it, that they understand that the critical nature of those and would also bring those types of things back to the full board to say, hey, here's a proposed way we can save money. I'll give you an example right now. We're looking at changing the number of beams, right, and making them smaller. We haven't went through the full process yet to know whether financially it actually is going to make a difference. Once we get that financial analysis, we will bring that back to the full board and say, hey, we've looked at this. Here's the engineering behind it. We've validated this as an option. We think it's this much cost savings, and that would be part of that trend program, right? Same thing with foundations. We're going to look at those again. So I think you know this as being an engineer, the evolution of design, that those things that are critical to the mission of the project need to be brought back to the board if you're changing an actual goal of the project.
But while there is still an opportunity
to make a difference, yes.
Jake wants to jump in. Yeah, Jake.
Yeah, I mean, Mike, you kind of touched on it, the decision of when a decision gets made, right? When does that need to be raised to the full board? I think that's something that I struggle with. I think sometimes what I feel is that when an issue gets raised to the full board, we aren't discussing options. An issue is raised, the committee has selected a a result that they support, and then the full board is asked to discuss that option. And I just feel like we're not giving other members of the organization a chance to really understand what other options were discussed and what other options were reviewed. I just feel like decisions are being sort of pre-selected and saying, well, as the committee, this is what we feel is the best. And so I feel like there's a lot of pieces of information that I'm missing to understand how the committee came to that decision. And I mean, certainly, and I mentioned this, that, on Wednesday, the communications group is going to be discussing website updates. I would certainly hope that it would concern the full committee, right? If we decided to change the website and not let you guys know about that, or at least not give you an option on what those changes are going to look like, right? You would certainly be probably frustrated, like, hey, why does it look completely different? And I don't think a correct answer is saying, well, we felt as a committee, this is the way we need to go. I would hope that our goal is to bring to the full board various options and we discuss it. And so I guess just to recap, I feel like it would be nice to have a little bit more discussion on what are some of the options when dealing with a particular issue.
I come back to when we first started here, we had a kind of a division of responsibility. What decisions can Mike make? What decisions does Mike need to bring back to the board? The committees were supposed to be resources to Mike to provide maybe a little broader perspective for Mike to make those decisions. And if I remember right, Mike had the ability to make the decision as long as it didn't increase the cost of the project or lengthen the schedule, which automatically increases the cost of the project. That's the two litmus tests that I remember. And I don't think in engineering construction, we ever violated that.
Yeah, and I know I can say the same in that we're not, in finance anyway, we're not sitting there making decisions or doing anything that's not explicitly delegated or authorized to Mike outside of the authority. And anything that's done is or has been explicitly delegated to Mike from the full authority, or it's brought back to the authority. Nobody sitting in the committee seats are making decisions outside of the committee board.
Yeah, the kinds of things that we're doing with Mike is, have you thought about this?
Yep.
What about that? We've seen this on other projects. How is it going to do here? We're not directing Mike to do anything. I've never used the word direct.
Yep.
I think there's always going to be bright ideas brought up or not bright ideas brought up that we're going to have to work through, right?
Yeah.
And bring back to the board and say, hey, we've thought about this. This is how we've summarized it. This is what happened. Here's what we need to do. Now, I will say, I hear you when you're saying that if you're going out to communicate something and we know that information may have changed, we need to make sure that your messaging is in line with where the project is. And I think we've made some changes on the communication side to make sure that happens better. I will say, I think there was a gap there in making sure everybody had, when they were going to speak, the latest talking points and that they were speaking to what the latest talking points are. We probably were speaking a little more definitive than where we were on the project, and we probably should have had a little more flexibility in that language. And I think we've tried to implement that and recognize that in now saying that that 1.2 million is within a range that was identified in the risk analysis. So I think that the project has evolved to that, and we're trying to do that in a better way. So I think some of that has been addressed through, improving some of the communications and how we're speaking to things and not speaking to things that are not final, right? Because again, we'll say we won't know the price of this project until you get a written estimate or a check or a bill from the contractor, right? So, but you have to speak to something, and you have to have a funding goal for the project that you ask for a certain amount of funding regardless of what you think that final price is going to be. And I think that has been something that has been a challenge, is that was a big change to the project, and I don't think anybody expected the magnitude of what that was. That had created a lot of like, well, what does this mean? And how do we speak to this humongous change that nobody really anticipated be as big as what it was? And I think kind of put our heads around, okay, well, this is now our new number. We've been a lot better to speak to it in what it is, and it's a target price, not a this is going to be the price. And we've made some of those adjustments. So I think we're heading in a better direction in doing that, or I feel like we have.
And I think we need to talk about definitions of target price. Everybody is in the same piece of paper. One thing you mentioned, Arthur, that would help me is if I knew who was meeting with what group outside. If we had something going on in ENC, it would give us maybe a little bit more insight. Hey, we better go talk to Arthur. Does he know about this? I have no clue who's doing what communication wise. I have no visibility whatsoever.
Yeah, and we're working with the comms committee to be better about identifying, and we've done it here recently, like with Grant and others, of like, hey, who's can go, here's who's going, here's the messaging. Everybody knows they're going, everybody knows what the messaging they're delivering.
That's really important. I'm glad that you're working on that. But again, the first concern I raised was that things are getting baked into the program, whether or not decisions have been made. Things are going to the point where there is no other decision that can be made without the full airing of it, so that the public and so that all the commissioners know and understand that.
Is there any
You're not making a decision, but it's a de facto decision that has.
Is there examples of that you have? Because I don't see that, and I would, I know one was, there was a conversation about eliminating the bike lane to save money. That is not something that is even on the table. That's not something that
discussion.
Yeah.
Different forms of the discussion as to how we would modify things that I believe to be fundamental to the success of the project and meeting the public's needs. And that's just a representation of a class of things like that.
Yeah, so I don't think, I would guess I would say the typical section, that typical section that's actually there is the proposed typical section, is generally the same exact typical section with the adjustment of shoulders. But that is the typical section that the project is moving forward with. And I think any significant change to that typical section is something that the board needs to weigh in on. But there is no concepts or developments of shrinking of that typical section that are being looked at right now.
There was
people that said, oh, let's take the bike lanes out. Yeah, that was said, but I think the understanding of that being said versus what that reality of what that did has resulted in that not being something that would be practical to do. So, and again, I think
the other way to say that is that there was some time spent to understand if you reduce that width, what's the impact on the foundations? And there really wasn't any.
And I think I would say that had that had a significant impact, it would have had to come back to the board for a discussion of, hey, this change has this level of impact. Does the board want to make this change?
So I am anticipating that at some point in the future, there will be a discussion about, well, we really have to cut X dollars of this. And I would like to not be angry at the end of that conversation. I would like to not be angry at feeling like I was left out of a discussion and that there were decisions made or there were de facto decisions that were made.
I don't foresee that happening. I really don't. I really do not see that happening.
I believe you're being honest with me. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I really, yeah. That would never be the intent.
See, I would
And I
think
don't
the
even-
next step is that
Scenario where it even could possibly happen, and I don't.
we're going to have a strategy discussion with the authority of what number do we need to try and fund to?
Yeah.
And how would that funding breakdown be? And what's the likelihood of really getting that money? And if there's not a chance in heck, then is there any other options? And frankly, I don't see any.
I think that's.
You don't see any options. Sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
You don't see any other options other than funding the project at full amount, is that?
No, if you really open your mind up, is there another place where this bridge could go? Now, once you start down that path, it's a nightmare. All of your environmental stuff starts all over. So that would be.
You'd be changing the whole project.
Really last resort. Yeah. You want a bridge or do you not?
No, if we go through this whole process and we end up at the end of the day and we just don't have enough money and we can get $800 million and we don't get a bid and we have $800 million, is there any way to get this project to where somebody would bid for it? I think you'd have to move the whole bridge somewhere else to get to that, given where we are, or there would have to be a significant economic downturn to make it more competitive. And I think that's, is that some scenario we look at 5 years down, 3 years down the road? Could be, but I think that's a huge decision that has a lot of conversations that need to happen before we get there.
And that's when we start just getting into hypotheticals,
Right.
Stuff that isn't reality right now.
And again, so I have no problem with that. I have no problem with the fact that they're hypotheticals, which isn't worth getting into. The problem is with my perception that there are de facto decisions being made, and I'm told that there aren't, and I'm happy to hear that.
I don't think there are. I mean, yeah. So.
I can say in the finance committee, there are no de facto decisions being made.
Do you understand the concept? Obviously.
Yeah, I get it. And I'm trying to, I'm literally trying to make sure there's not even something that would happen that you would like. So I'll give you an example, like aesthetics, that could happen, right? The plan is that once we
can't afford color.
Well, the plan is once we get into 1B, at some point within the first 6 months of 1B, we have an aesthetics memo that was developed that needs a response.
Right.
And somewhere in that first 6 months, we need to have a pause and say, hey, this memo said this is what we're doing. Are we meeting that commitment, right? And that conversation needs to be not committee, but with the public. Because there was a public process that we had that we have to me, go back and fulfill that I think you guys need to do, right? And I think that is something that we, could we go through and go, we're not gonna do that, we're not gonna do this, right? And then bring you and say, we can't do any of that stuff. That is not the intent. That's not how we want to run this project.
It's be a real decision as opposed
Absolutely.
to, hey, guess what, guys, here's what it has to be. Jake wants to get in again.
Jake?
Well, yeah, I mean, I just want to go back to something that Mike said. You mentioned decisions aren't being made, or if a decision is going to impact the cost of the project or raise the cost of the project, those sort of decisions have to go back to the full board. And I just want to ask, is that too loose? I mean, do we need to maybe modify that to maybe provide a little bit more tighter bookends as to what sort of decisions should be at the full board versus the individual committee level?
We set those parameters a while ago, or what the exact numbers were.
I thought that I was limited to like a dollar number.
You are.
I think it's like $5 or $10 million. It was pretty low.
You are limited.
Right. So you're saying anything outside of that is going to work its way through the full board. And like I said, I respect all of you, and I just want to know that there aren't these de facto decisions being made and that I'm not going to be angry after I learn something.
We might make a decision, you still might be angry about it.
No,
There's
but
no-
I've been involved in government long enough to understand that, but there's a difference, right?
Yeah.
I know.
I get it.
I don't want this to be one of those secretive organizations where a lot of the real decision making happens elsewhere. I think we've done a good job of trying to be forthright and public with all of this, and I think we have I don't think anyone is intentionally doing that, but I think that Marla and I both had a feeling that we were being left out of decision making, which I translate as being that decisions are being not privy to.
I think it was more that things were being looked at as more factual or precise than we ended up finding out they were. Right. And I think there was a couple of things that led to that. One is the foundations. One was the contractor price was significantly more than we thought we were going to get. I think we were confident we had a good number, and I'm still confident we did. I think there's things that outside of our control that have affected that were hard to get your hands around as far as how to incorporate that. You know, when you know that, a 50% increase over the last 2 years over an estimate is an unrealistic number, to accept that that's reality is still hard. Because I still don't think this is $1 billion project.
Let me throw an example out, because we're talking about the toll models. And I believe that the value of the bridge to the community will change significantly if the toll models wind up shifting to the right in that.
Somebody new called in. Can you mute that? Be somebody called in? Okay.
Yeah, so the value of the bridge to the community is likely to change if, not likely, but will change if there are, as we shift to the right. So that discussion has to be one we, as a group, discuss it.
And that was kind of the point of bringing you guys this information, was so that you can start thinking about that, of like, that's a big deal. I mean, that's a big deal to the communities that you guys all are making a decision on that shouldn't be taken lightly and needs to have a lot of discussion around it. But it's also setting a reality of you can't do this on your own. Right. So it serves another purpose of saying to our partners at the state and federal level, we can't do this on our own. There's no way that we can financially replace this bridge on our own. None.
And you shared that information as soon as you had it, and it was shared at a point where there have been no decisions made.
Right.
And that's great. No complaints about that.
Okay. And that's our intent, to continue to do that.
Right.
So, but with that information, it seems to me that we could look at what that toll rate is, and you can reverse engineer what this community can physically, if we can leverage all of our local money, what this community can afford.
Right.
And if you look at what our budget is right now, and what this community can afford, it's not very different. And how do we, right now, the schedule's going out. Every time the schedule goes out, we add $40 to $50 million per year. And if we're out 2 or 3 years, that I think we're outside of what this community can physically afford.
Right, but if we also look at, if we look at $2.25 toll versus a $3.54 toll, clearly that has a huge impact on the community.
Exactly.
But also saying, okay, we are not willing to build the bridge at a 354 toll because of that impact, and therefore the community will have no bridge. So that's, I don't look forward to that discussion, but that's a discussion we have to have.
And that still has an impact on the communities, right? Because if you look at a 40-mile round trip at 20 miles a gallon, that's still an $8 cost to everybody if you don't have a bridge. So it's like, where is that balance point of like,
Well, it's a fundamental, it's a fundamental change in what Wichita County looks like.
Yeah. People start changing.
To a lesser extent, but what the two counties look like, what the local business community looks like, what agriculture looks like in our area. what industry looks like in our area. So I think we all know that. And my point is, though, that we just have to keep reminding ourselves that discussion has to happen in.
There should be a healthy public discussion on that.
Right.
Yeah. Great.
Can I ask a question? Because I think kind of, I mean, I know we've got quite a few more things to come up to, but like when we're talking about the committees and the modifications to them, you know, this is kind of one of the first, you know, real public committees I've served on. And I feel like there's been a pretty big range in the work that the committees and the individuals on the board and the commissioners have done, you know, that range from like general oversight of the process, which, you know, is mostly constructive, but I do think we also need to be careful that like we're, you know, as a committee, not slowing the project down or making it more expensive. But then there've also been major contributions from the commissioners, from the committees. And I'm wondering, like, what is the role of the committees and us as commissioners? Like, should we be actively having a project or multiple projects for each of the committees that, you know, that is helping move the bridge project closer to our objectives? Or should our focus really be more on governance and then making sure that HNTB is doing what their job is, and, you know, picking up kind of pieces just like sort of as they fall through the cracks?
I'd offer something to think about a little bit there, in that in all the projects that I've done in my life, the customer that I work for, a utility or whatever, they were what I call intelligent customers. They knew that project. They knew what they wanted to use that project for. They knew how they were going to maintain that project after the contractor left. If you don't have an organization, and right now it's us, because we don't have an executive director or a staff yet. If you don't have somebody that's watching out for that, I think you're doing a disservice for the project long term. That's my opinion.
I think I would agree that it's not the tasks we do right now. It's how we prep for the future, because the cost going out 100 years is going to far exceed anything we do to speed up or slow down or grab onto or let go on the process right now. It's making sure that we're set up on there. We've got the governance thing set up there. I think we're doing the right thing on the ENC to follow standards that already exist so that we can know it. More detail there is probably worth it. I think we've got some great experience on the finance end to look at those options so that we don't, I mean, I could easily see us, you get all excited to get something up there and then you end up with some sort of financial obligation in the future that you've got no plan for and no thing. And the fact that we're looking at all that, I think is great, and keeping the community abreast of what it is we're trying to do. It's clearly not easy, and it's not always a rosy discussion to the community, but it is the reality of what we're trying to do.
Guys, are you also asking what the expectation is of the overarching board of the committee members?
Well, both of the committee members and of the subcommittees. Like, you know, I guess it's like, you know, I mean, and I want to caveat this by saying that, like, I have a bunch of work obligations right now, and I have not been showing up for my subcommittee responsibilities. But I also don't really know what my subcommittee responsibilities are right now. Like, if I did an incrementally like 30% better job on my subcommittee, like, what is that going to move the ball forward for in a meaningful way? And I don't think that there is nothing that we could be working on. But I do think that direction, you know, I don't know if it originates at the subcommittee or if it should originate at the board, but it does seem like I feel like if each of the committees, you know, had like
and identify kind of what are the things that they are most, focused on, that may help fill some of the gap, like that might be some of like what we don't know right now, at the general board is like, what's really important that's happening in the finance committee or in the ENC committee right now, or in the governance committee, and what should there be?
One of the things that I put up here, because I really do think this would help you all a lot, is number 7. I think a 1-hour meeting, either before or after the board meeting, that is a committee chair meeting where the 4 committee chairs and the 2 co-chairs get together. It'll have to be public, but you guys just have an hour where you talk to each other as a chair lead to be able to just talk about the project would be beneficial. Then you could take that back to your subcommittee members. And the only reason I shrink it to the 4 leads is in respect of people's time, that not everybody can go to another hour's worth of meeting, because you guys are volunteering and we're trying to do as much as we can to lessen that, right? And we'll welcome as much time as you have and want to put into the project, but we're also okay if you can't. And, I think though something like that would help that communications to make sure people are hearing what the other committees are doing and feel like maybe they're getting a little insight.
And abreast of any trend changes or anything else that might be coming up that might change some fundamental thing that's going on with the project.
I think communication's good. You're not going to go wrong with it. But I think also, like the ENC does a meeting notes from our meeting. If you guys want them, we'll hand them out to everybody.
They're all on the SharePoint.
Yeah.
And I think different people hear and learn things in different ways, right? I'd rather sit down and have an hour meeting with you than to go read 4 pages of written notes.
Right.
I just would rather do that, right? So I think if that's something that is the group as a whole, or people feel like, hey, I'd rather sit down and hear an hour than spend 2 hours of my time reading and digesting what somebody wrote that I may or may not understand and can't ask a question when I get one. Is that valuable to you guys? I've just heard a lot of that silo discussion, and to me, one solution to that is you do something like that where there's more of a focused conversation between the heads.
But Ben's question, I think, I'm not sure I heard an answer. He asked, what are the, number 3 is, what are the expectations? What are the roles and responsibility of committee members? I don't think that we can, as a public organization, you can only operate for a short period of time in the way that we've been operating, where you have your elected officials playing this intense role until or unless it becomes a full-time paid position, then it's not reasonable to expect. And you wind up filtering who participates into it to people who have means and time and ability to participate. So it's not a good thing from a democratic point of view to require the level of expectation, the level of commitment of time that we've been requiring. So that's my opinion on this, based on my involvement on many other boards. So I think this is a short-term thing. I think we do have to address it.
I agree. We're not really a board. We're owners. And that's different than a board. And until we get staff, I think you just about have to keep doing what you're doing.
I'm not arguing that. I think I agree with you. And we've talked about this, and really the question is just at what point can we afford it? And we're not in a position to be able to afford it at this moment. Right. But that's my answer to your question. In my experience, we are expecting more than we should. We should be expecting that people like you, who are executive in their own company, who have significant other responsibilities, are going to be able to tune into this, to hear a summary of what the issues are, and to apply their expertise in this environment, and to give the public the benefit of their analysis in making decisions on the public behalf, but not to have to follow it at the level that we do today.
Yeah, anybody who's ever worked for a startup organization understands what this position takes. Anybody who hasn't worked at a startup does not. So that's the expectation that these chairs, I think, have right now. So
Well, what do you guys think about number 7? Should we implement that?
I think so.
Or so there's that, or there's something like that. I mean, the one that comes to me is, okay, so on your committee, what are the 4 things that make you nervous at night? The things that you're worrying about, throw them out on the table. You're not trying to resolve it. You're just, these are issues that we're struggling with. You know, mine's a pretty short list, but we've got the ROD and the BO going on. That's following a process, but the biological opinion has 2 significant issues that will affect how the new bridge goes up, and it has 2 significant issues about how the old bridge will come down. Whether those are financially significant or not, we don't know, but they're 4 issues, and the process for resolving them is pretty long and drawn out. Hopefully, I mean, Christy gave us a good kind of outline of that it's going on. And then the MOUs, it just seems like a process that just keeps going.
I think that we spend, that is great. And that's the sort of thing I would like to be discussing in these meetings. I think we spend too much of the meetings talking about things that we should be getting simply from reading the packet, that don't need to be discussed publicly. And I think I said this before, that people presume because they know it's going to be discussed publicly, therefore they don't have to read the packet because someone's going to read it to you out loud. We need to stop doing that so that the meetings don't have to be longer. It's not the question of do we take a 3-hour meeting and make it a 15-hour meeting. It should be, I think there's an hour of actual content in each meeting, and we wind up spending 2 or 3 hours discussing that hour of content. And what you just described is a great example of something that's actual content. I think we had several really interesting, I think today was one of the better meetings in terms of actual content versus kind of boilerplate. But I would like us to not allow the time to be spent in the meeting on things that people could have read simply by reading the summary in the packet. I mean, I've run a lot of meetings in my life, and I this kind of pisses me off, right?
I didn't mean to get you both.
No, you said exactly the right thing. Yeah, or at least you said something I agree with.
So let's go back up.
Said the right thing, then, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's my definition of the right thing.
So how about item number 4? I know we got a couple of people that are going to be leaving here pretty quick. We're going to need somebody coming on to the E&C committee. Does anybody have a burning desire to do that?
I think I would have that discussion after we have new people on the committee.
I think one of the things that we just to highlight that this group has done well is complement the entire authority with expertise from a variety of different sources that complement the needs of the authority right now. I think the needs of the authority are going to evolve as we go through this process. Because of that, the people on the authority probably need to evolve as well to bring in new skill sets that complement that. So, you know, one naturally goes to, if that is in fact the case, should we be looking for a couple of skill sets that help complement or fill a hole that we see coming?
If that's the case, then we have to do that pretty quickly because there'll be applications. We'll be putting out, the county level will be putting out requests for applications very soon for Mike's position.
And Seth's.
And that's right. Yeah. Well, we being Hood River County.
Well, so I mean that is, I mean, the county commissioners or county commission is responsible for doing that. Does the authority have a role in saying, look, we're doing pretty well, but we would really like someone that has the skill set, or this is something.
Decisions up to the county board of commissioners, but that I cannot imagine that both boards of commissioners wouldn't be thrilled to have some guidance on what we're looking for.
Yeah. That might be a worthy discussion amongst us.
How about the rest of them up there? Anything that you guys want to talk about?
But all of them about changing committees, I think we can simply defer that to until we have commissioners.
Yeah.
We'll have two more commissioners in the room.
Okay, so what I think I heard is we're going to go ahead and implement number 7.
I think we should have, yes, and see what I think we should combine it with a discussion of what the structure of the meeting should look like, because I think we can have that discussion without extending the meeting to 3 hours from 2 hours.
So the first meeting is, here's how we want to run this thing.
Okay.
Yeah, fine.
We'll add that to your next board meeting.
Either the next one or the one after that. It's, I'm not, we don't have to make.
Well, we got a problem on the next one. That's Memorial Weekend, right?
Okay, so let's do that.
We're in Nez Perce.
Yeah, let's do it in June.
I think that's better. Okay. So this is.
He's got his little boxes next to him.
I just got to put an action item next to it, because otherwise it won't get done. So, but whenever it doesn't work.
We all have our particular talents to this effort.
We will have it on your 1 hour.
Yeah, we can clearly articulate our action items after.
Okay, is that it? Anybody want to say any closing thoughts? Yep.
I am hearing that we don't need to schedule a 3-hour workshop for the committees. That was the point of this 1 hour, is to avoid 3 hours.
Yes.
Is that everybody's in agreement?
Yeah, I think it's a shame that Marla wasn't involved in this. I don't know what Marla is going to say. And I would like to have that discussion with her.
Well, I got a problem with that.
No, I understand. That's fair.
I mean, we can't keep chasing somebody that doesn't show up. So from my point of view, we've made the decision. And if you want to talk to her about it, cool, that's fine. But that's my opinion.
Well, we've got of the questions that we talked about, there's still 3 or 4 that are open, and there's further discussion that follows up on a group, on a committee chairs. So there's the discussion's not over, I guess is my point. And we shouldn't just say that we made a decision that's final and we're done and we've checked it and we're moving on. We should be continually looking and evaluating what decisions we've made, what the results are.
You're absolutely right. I agree with you. I think where I was coming from, we need to recognize we had this discussion.
Okay.
It's
and move on.
the airing of the grievances as a Festivus celebration. The airing of the grievances.
Where's our poll?
Yeah, Jake.
Where's our aluminum poll?
Hey, Jake, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I think having a meeting of the subcommittee heads is a really good idea. I think, we were talking about some of the fears of our committee. The communications committee, part of our job is very reactionary to what's happening. And I think some of our collective fear is sort of not having a full grasp of what's going on. And I think maybe this 1 hour meeting or that additional communication between the subcommittees may lessen that fear. So I think that's a really good idea.
Thank you. Final call. We are adjourned. Thank you.